What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back for another episode of the Doug Polk Podcast. We have an exciting one today. We're going to be doing something we've never done here on the podcast. We're going to be doing a ranking of the greatest poker players of all time. Who is the best player to have played the game? It's going to be decided by you, the viewer. I know we're going to have a lot of objections to some of the people on the list already, and I have a few rules I'm going to go through here. We'll talk about that coming up in a second. We're going to be joined shortly by Mike Brady to break it down and give you guys the case for who should be in the top 20. And then we're going to take it from there. But before we jump into that, I want to let you guys know that today's podcast is brought to you by CoinFlex. CoinFlex is a cryptocurrency derivatives exchange and is the home of crypto yield for people to both trade and earn crypto. We have exciting news to share today. CoinFlex is coming to the US with CoinFlex.us, the only place in America where you can earn interest every 8 hours with Flex USD. Flex USD is a revolutionary stablecoin that is fully backed, independently verified, and pays interest every 8 hours. No staking or lockups required. You can convert Flex USD with Flex USD 1-to-1 with US dollars at any time and start earning interest wherever you hold it. Whether it's in your own CoinFlex.us wallet, your MetaMask, or even in cold storage, you'll be getting paid every 8 hours. To celebrate the launch, CoinFlex.us is giving away $100,000 for the first 2,000 people who join their waitlist. Create an account when the exchange goes live, mints $100 of Flex USD, and holds it for a minimum of 14 days. It's $50 a person, 2,000 people, you do the math. Head over now to www.coinflex.us to learn more. Legal disclaimer: none of the information contained here constitutes an offer to buy or sell any currency, product, or financial instrument, to make any investment, or to participate in any particular trading strategy. A little bit of business here I want to get through before we have Mike hop on. First up, I want to let you guys know about a tournament series we got going on over at the Lodge. It's called the Spring Mayhem Series. It's a semi-annual series. We have it twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. Last fall, actually, before Brad, Andrew, and I joined the team, it got about a $1.6 million prize pool, so it was already a big tournament. Lord knows how big it'll be this time around. Extremely excited for that event. And it's actually a series of events kicking off today with a freeze out. I'm actually going to be heading over to the Lodge after this podcast to jump in there, assuming that this podcast doesn't go too late because it might be a long one. Either way, I'll be by the Lodge later today. Hoping everyone who can make it out does so, and looking forward to a great series. Okay, let's get down to business here. I want to talk a bit about what we're doing and explain some things about this list because, look, it's going to be controversial. I understand that. And, of course, people have their favorite player, and, of course, popular players are going to have audiences, and there's all kinds of things that we should be thinking about. But I want to talk about what we're trying to do here and the way I want to approach it. So, for starters, we're ranking who is the best poker player. Now, what does the word best mean, right? Does it mean plays the most games well? Does it mean has won the most money? Does it mean they play at the highest level? Does it mean at their absolute peak they were the best player? Does it mean they had the longest career of playing well? There are so many different ways that you can interpret what the word best means. And they're going to be different to different people. For some people, it's going to be certain formats over others. Let me give you an example. Let's say we're talking about mixed game players versus no limit hold'em players. Well, you might say mixed game players are good at 5, 6, 7, 10 games, 15 games. Hold'em players are just one-trick ponies. Well, that's true. Or you could also make the argument no limit hold'em is the game played by most of the world in poker. So getting good at that format and being a top player in that format is incredibly more competitive and means way more than knowing how to play Badoogie well, which is also true. So we're going to have to think about all of these things when we're moving forward, trying to make our ranking. A couple other things on this subject. First off, I want to avoid people trying to get their audiences to go vote for them. I think it would be really cool if people promote going to vote in this to try and essentially get as many viewpoints in here as possible to get the best ranking for players. But what I don't want to see is people that have large audiences just saying, go vote for me in this poll. If you do that, we're going to have to try and figure out a way to fix that because this isn't supposed to be a popularity contest. I know it turns into that a bit, but that's not the goal of this ranking. The goal of this ranking is to try and get something that is well thought out. And that's why when we do this vote, it's going to be on upswingpoker.com/vote. It's not going to be live until after the podcast finishes. And you're going to have to fill out on a scale of essentially 1 to 5 who is least to most deserving to be in the top 20. It's going to take a little bit of time. At first, we were considering doing some IP restrictions, some stuff like that, but I think just the fact that to spend that much time going through and ranking players should be a pretty good job of making the list fair. Okay, another take here, guys. You have to understand the era of players. I think this is going to be a common theme throughout this conversation. When someone plays poker in the 1980s, 1990s versus today, it's very different. And so that you see that in a lot of different ways. You see that in, of course, their level of play. If you take someone from the 70s versus someone today, the player today will obviously destroy them in poker. That's not, maybe you like some of the old school guys, but the reality is the game has evolved too much. You don't have a chance in today's game. But they didn't have the resources that we have today. They didn't see the top players online. They didn't have internet. They didn't have any of these tools that you have today to play at a high level. So we had to do a little bit of understanding the era when we're looking at different players. It's not just a one-to-one who would win in a match today. Of course, the players today are going to be stronger than the players yesterday. And guess what? The players in 10 years will be stronger than they are today. No doubt about that. But at the same time, we still do have to understand that while we have to respect the era, we do also have to respect how competitive the game has gotten in the last 1 or 2 decades. A lot of these matches that went down for World Series of Poker events in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they were very, very small. And so winning a 20-person sit and go really isn't the same thing as winning a 1,000-person event. So certainly some things to be thinking about there. We'll talk about that more in the conversation today. Another thing I want to mention briefly here is we're going to have to be using primarily almost entirely public available data for these player rankings. So things like bracelets, things like tournament winnings, things like online cash results, things like online tournament results to some extent, things like perhaps playing in higher stakes cash games that have been televised. There's going to be an entire class of player that is going to get essentially no credit here because look, and people have said this to me, oh, I know this guy that's done really well in private games. Okay, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Just, I heard this guy did great in private games. So what are we going to do? We're going to vote on, you heard one guy did something. So we're going to be focusing on public verified games. I think there's a few exceptions that could make some sense. And definitely if we know someone has been a regular in some of these higher stakes games for a long period of time, in Bobby's room, in Ivy's room, in Macau, in any high stakes game, maybe in some private games, that stuff we can certainly add in their favor as a positive and upside to that player and kind of who they are. But we can't just be using, I heard a guy won X amount of dollars in some game that's unverified, because it's just frankly, we have to have verifiable data, at least to some extent. And otherwise the ranking becomes pretty obsolete pretty quickly. So I think we've been through most of this. We're going to be narrowing a list of 100 players down to just a top 20 over the next few days or week. We're going to have the podcast today. We're going to run through everyone on the list. It's going to be a long podcast today. I'm going to explain the formatting a little bit. We're going to be joined by Mike Brady here in a second. The way it's going to work, we have 100 names. And there were names that were very close. In fact, there were names afterwards where I felt, oh shit, I really should have maybe had that person. I look at them and I think maybe I can get rid of that person. I did that a few times, but then the reality is when we're looking at a 100-person list, this is not the top 100 people in poker history. Definitely there's some people that should have been on here. I'm sure I missed some, but I don't think I missed anyone that would be in our top 20, the way we would view poker. And so that's really what this is about. If you feel like I missed somebody at the end of the podcast, we're going to have a write-in. So, or rather at the end of the voting, you can write in people you think I missed that should have been in the top 20. But I really feel like we got more or less the best 100, maybe 5, 10, 15 guys that could have been in there. But the top 20 are almost certainly all going to be in this list. So anyway, back to the formatting today. The way it's going to work, we're going to read a player's name, and then the other person, either me or Brady, will give the case for them, and then the person that read their name will give the case against. That's going to mean that you're going to have to make some pretty ridiculous against arguments for people that should clearly be in the top 20. And also, you're going to have to make some pretty ridiculous positive arguments for people that should not be. That's just the reality of the situation. So plenty of opportunity for people to take some out of context sound bites and play them for the rest of time, which is absolutely great, because guess what? Someone here is going to have to argue against Phil Ive being in the top 20. Maybe he shouldn't be, but regardless, just keep it with take a grain of salt on these and realize we're doing our best to explain both sides of the argument, what it could potentially be, and then we'll kind of get down to the bottom of it. Also, chat, more than welcome to chime in with things you think. We're going to go through that a bit. Normally, we kind of ignore the chat. But on this one, I'm sure that we're going to do some people some injustice because it's just simply so many people. Please, by all means, let us know your thoughts in the comments, things that we might have missed that you think are important for us today. So that's going to be it here. I think on that note, I'm going to go ahead and add in my co-host for today's stream. Mike, thank you for joining us.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for having me, Doug. I want to say a few things before we kick off here. So first of all, obviously, this is all subjective, as all lists are. I mean, best alone is a weird word. It means different things to different people. So you might weight different things differently in the sort of formula in your head for who is the best at something. And that's actually part of this whole process. We're crowdsourcing these opinions, and we're getting all of these different people's definitions of best in the vote. And then at the end, that's sort of all going to trickle down to the top 20. And then I believe the plan, Doug, is in the last episode to convene a panel of judges who can sort of talk this over more in depth and add some extra sort of perspectives to the discussion.
Right. This is going to be a two-step process. Today is step one. We're going to narrow a 100-person list down to 20. In fact, it was a bit of a process getting down to the 100. I spent a good number of hours on this, changing and adding and putting together some notes and trying to be fair. And one of the other things is you have to recognize your own biases towards certain player types. And I recognize that for me, a lot of the online cash guys, I just view clearly superior to a lot of people. And I viewed online tournament guys as, I didn't take them very seriously. And it was very clear on my 100-person list. A lot of the tournament guys complained that, where are the online tournament guys? And then Pads posted a list of all the top online tournament guys. I looked at the names. I knew almost none of them. Just straight up. Like, it looked like he was just drawing names out of the hat.
To be fair, you'd probably know more if he had put their screen names, because there were some names in there that, no offense to those other countries, I didn't know names looked like that ever. So yeah, it's kind of tricky. One other thing I wanted to say is, as Doug mentioned a second ago, I mean, we're just two people, Doug and I, right now. We're not going to have the depth of knowledge that for all of these players. I mean, we've heard of all of them. We're somewhat familiar, at least, with all of them. But I mean, we have thousands of people. We're going to have thousands of people watching throughout this podcast. So if you know something that we don't, if we kind of leave, if we seem unsure about something, go ahead and chime in so we know. Like, maybe we'll be talking about someone and we'll say, oh, I don't know if they've played much online cash, but I know they've done great in live tournaments. But you know that person has played and crushed online cash or whatever it is. Please let us know, because we're happy to have you supplement our knowledge here. That's sort of a key point in why we're doing it this way. And then one last thing before we kick off with the first player. All of these players are great, with maybe a couple exceptions that are kind of trolly, but all of these players are great. So anything negative we say about them, keep in mind, I mean, they're great players. They made this list of potentially being the best poker player of all time. So, grain of salt when we're making negative arguments.
Well, actually, one last topic here, Mike. Well, it's going to be interesting here to try and think about how we value people that play different game types versus playing the more popular game types. Because if you just played tournaments, your no limit hold'em tournaments your entire career, no one would bat an eyelid at that. That's a very standard thing to do, right? If you played no limit cash, same thing. If you played, let's just say, mixed games, I mean, it would be a little bit more strange to have only played mixed games, but there are a select group of people that have done that, and some of the top guys are some of the absolute best players in the world. But those games aren't very publicized and also are played by much smaller player pools. So I recognize it's hard to compare someone that has played tournaments their entire life versus someone that's been a high-stakes cash game pro in private games. But the reality of the situation is we're going to have to weigh things a little more on the side of widely played and competitive, and of course with public results. So I've seen some mixed game players, the mixed game player community get a little. I've already seen some communities kind of trying to rally around their
I love it. I love it. It's great. It's great. Oh, there is one more thing, actually. So we have these 100 people we're going over today, everyone. But when the vote happens, when you go to upswingpoker.com/vote, which, like Doug said, that'll be available after this podcast, there's going to be a section at the end. Once you scroll all the way to the bottom, vote on every player. Once you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's going to be a section for write-ins. So if you feel like someone got snubbed, that and deserves the best ranking, which is a 1 to 5 ranking for each player. If you think someone deserves a 5 that wasn't included, you have 3 places to write people in. So feel free to write people in there, only 1 each. Don't double up. But the idea there is if enough people write in a particular player, they're going to be moved into the conversation, because we do want to make sure any obvious snubs are then included in future episodes.
Okay, sounds good. I think we are prepared here. Let's get into player number 1, the first player. And by the way, guys, we RNG'd this. So these are in a random order. And if you go to the Upswing site, they are all randomized per voter. So it's all as random as we could possibly get it. And our first person on our list of top 100 players of all time, Jake Schindler. Now, Jake Schindler has $29 million in career tournament earnings. This puts him good for number 15 in live MTTs. Also, a bit of a history of success in online tournaments, although I think he did get some money locked up in one of those successful events along the way. Also been a cash game player in the Vegas streets, played particularly high stakes cash games. Mike, Jake Schindler, the case for Jake.
Well, Jake has been a quite dominant player over the past, he's been pretty active for the last roughly 10 years. He's been competing at the highest level the entire time. He's obviously had great success with 29 million in earnings, playing against some of the toughest competition, and he's done very, very well. I'm not super familiar with his cash game exploits, but I would assume he's played at least some, but I can't speak for that. What would you say is the case against?
So I think with Jake, we have a classic one-trick pony kind of guy. He's known for tournaments. He has played some cash games. Debatable how successful he's been in those. Obviously, no limit hold'em tournaments are his main focus by far and away. And look, he's racked up 29 million in earnings. That's great, but these have been primarily playing in the high roller circuit, which has been honestly has made all of the top 5, 10, 15, 20 guys. It's inflated all of their winnings drastically. And so what is that in ROI? Like it might be 29 million in earnings, but what does that really drive down to an actual profit? So Jake's a good player. I've played with Jake a good amount. He's tough. He hangs in there. But if you're gonna be cracking my top 20, I got to see some talent in some other areas than just the fact that you play the daily 25K area.
Yeah, reasonable. All right, so moving on to Nick Petrangelo, 23 million in earnings, 24th in live MTTs all time, 2 World Series of Poker bracelets. Doug, the case for Nick.
So Nick, I think is a little more well-rounded. I feel like Nick's been in the online streets for a bit longer than Jake. I feel like he might be a little bit older than Jake, played a little bit longer. I don't know why I'm comparing the Jake, just compared to our last entrant. More of a regular in some of the high stakes cash games, to my knowledge. A couple WSOP bracelets. I think the thing for Nick is if you just see the way that he plays, he's extremely level-headed, very well balanced, good approach to the game, tough to play against. Nick's never someone you want any of your games. I'm sure that any person playing a high stakes game wouldn't want to see Nick in these lineups. So I think that'd be my case for Nick.
Yeah, makes sense. I think the case against Nick is, as much as it pains me to make the case against Nick because I like him so much as a person, but he is similar to Jake in that he really hasn't done so much in the public eye besides playing mainly no limit hold'em tournaments, some no limit hold'em, high stakes cash, and all that. But there hasn't been really any mixed games played. I don't even think he hops too much into the PLO streets too often. Which you often see like the no limit guys, if they're gonna jump into another game, it's usually that, maybe short deck in recent years. So he hasn't done much of that. So I think he might be near that top 20 point with how dominant he's been in live MTTs and online MTTs, but he might fall outside of it.
Also, when you look at, if we're going to take someone as a bit of the case against, I guess, but if you look at, after we make the case for it against, we can just have conversation on to say that kind of stuff. But when I look at it like, okay, so Nick is number 24th in career earnings in tournaments without, a history of high stakes cash success online, at least in the more classical cash game days. If you're going to be someone that specifically plays only no limit, I really feel like you got to have some pretty extraordinary results there to make the top 20, because if it's a guy that's somewhat similar, but also plays a bunch of different games and also is in Bobby's room for mixed games a lot, or playing the big bet mix at Aria, or has been a successful player at high stakes online, in full tilt stars back in the day. I feel like if you're going to be just no limit, you really got to have something that that kind of puts you over the top. And I feel like, yeah, he's kind of, it's weird we start with Jake and Nick because I feel like they're kind of similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think having played with both of them, I feel like Jake is a little more of an animal. Like he'll just put you in some really tough spots, but I think Nick is extremely even keeled and just kind of maybe a higher baseline. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, moving on to Igor Kurganov. 19 million in live earnings. That's good for number 37 in live MTTs all time. The case 4, that's going to fall on me this time. He has also kind of been a regular in the super high roller stuff, and he's competed at that level. That said, I think he's been in the mix in those tournaments quite a bit. And it's bizarre to say this about such a big number, but 19 million actually seems like a little low considering how long he's been in the mix and how many of those he's played. I think I remember him being in like the 250Ks even in Australia and such. And you cash one of those, that's 500 or $1 million on your resume. Pretty easy.
Watch out what you say about that tournament. Cashing those is extremely prestigious, Mike.
That's coming from the 3rd place finisher in one of those, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, Igor has also played a lot of online cash, but I think he kind of hasn't played much online cash in like the solver era, so he hasn't really maintained that top level when it comes to online cash. I just started making the case against without realizing it. But yeah, go ahead if you have any thoughts.
I think for Igor, Igor, how do I pronounce this correctly?
Igor, I think.
Okay. For Igor, my name pronunciation just on top of it here today, guys.
Just do your best.
The reality is that he had a good online cash or online tournament career, transitioned that over to live tournaments, did well with there. He's one of the best Germans in terms of results. The reality is that he just simply doesn't have the results compared to these other people that also only played no limit tournaments. He wasn't a cash game no limit player. He hasn't been good in a lot of these other formats. I just feel like it's just unlikely that I just don't see a reason that we could put him over either of the first 2 players in this list. I almost took him off this list. He was one of my bubble people that I looked at as I don't know if that's influencing too far or not, but
I think it might be, but let's hold off on that in the future.
Yeah, okay. So I just don't see how he's going to come in across above some of these other guys to make the top 20. I don't see the argument for it.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, next up, Spirit Rock, Prahlad Friedman, 2.5 million in live earnings, and he was kind of one of the first end bosses of online poker. Like Doug was kind of in the mix before me, so I would say, what was it, around 2005 was when he was really just mashing everyone on like full tilt heads up tables and stuff like that.
Probably a little even after that. I think that the case for him, if we're going to keep all trading here, I think the case for him is that this guy has played poker at a high level for many, many years. One of the absolute original end bosses of online poker plays. Played a lot of ring. He's played a lot of live. He's played a lot of heads up. He's played for so long in such a variety of formats and been consistently good the entire time. I don't think that he was someone that managed to transition into the modern era very well, so that might be a dock against him. But all in all, a lot of success across the board, especially when people are 5-betting Jack 7 suited against him.
Definitely, he's very good at having aces in those situations. Yeah, the case against Prahlad is kind of going to be somewhat similar to my case against Igor that I accidentally made, which is he just hasn't had much staying power at the highest level. Like, he was competing and absolutely crushing. Arguably the most feared player there was in that like early to mid till maybe late 2000s, but certainly hasn't been at competing at the highest levels in the solver era. Kind of even wasn't battling at the high stakes online in like 2012-ish. I don't even think he was super in the mix.
Yeah, he wasn't anymore.
So yeah, it's just there was this very relatively brief period of poker where he was, one of the most feared players. And, if you made this list in 2006 or 2007 or something, I think Prahlad would have like a really, really good chance at cracking the top 20, if not better. But looking at the rest of the names we've already looked at and the names to come, it's just hard for me to see an argument for him making it.
Another thing I would say is that when you play No Limit Hold'em as your main game, you kind of need to be good at both cash and tournaments, I think, to sort of bolster your profile to make this list. And if you're going to be good at No Limit Cash, you need to also have at least something in the tournament vicinity. He's got one tournament cash in the last 10 years, basically. He won a 10K at Legends of Poker in 2009, but that's basically his only major. He also won a brace actually in 2003, but these are pretty long ago events for small scores. I just don't see the resume across both game types to really put him in the top 20.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, moving on to Limitless. I believe it's pronounced Victor Malinowski. He's got 4.4 million in live earnings. By the way, guys, if you're wondering why we keep repeating live earnings, it's because it's one of the only quickly available sort of stats to pull. So we're pulling it. It's not that we're overweighting it, just something to, actually bring up and compare player versus player. So Limitless, while he does have that 4.4 million in live earnings, he's been an absolute crusher online for a while. Definitely one of the most feared players online, even kind of at the moment, I believe. He still gets in there. Believe he's kind of more of a big bet player, just kind of no limit PLO. I don't think he's hopped too much into any other game types. But yeah, I mean, he's a great player who for a long time was kind of taking on anyone. What are your thoughts on Victor?
I think the case against is he's frankly very overrated. Most of the high stakes cash guys view him as the weakest spot in a lot of these lineups. It's kind of unclear where he ended up getting a lot of this money from to be able to play at these stakes. Definitely spewy. Values himself too high in a lot of these formats. Not played a lot of mixed games tournaments. Not a long series of mixed game cash games. Not a long series of tournament history. He did win a high roller for 4 million. That's almost all of his live earnings. So at least something on the live felt, but really not that much there either. Seems like maybe he's just a bit too narrow in scope and probably even overrated at that.
Perhaps. All right, so moving on to Johnny Chan, absolute legend of the game, of Rounders fame, 8.7 million in live earnings, 10 World Series of Poker bracelets. That's tied for second of all time. What's your case for Mr. Chan?
Johnny Chan is an absolute icon of poker. The guy's got $9 million in earnings, and he did it in a time period where it was much harder to do that. These guys nowadays, they can probably get that in a weekend if the right tournaments line up over in Vegas. This guy did it over years. Main event winner. 2x main event winner, I believe. At least one.
Yeah. Back to back, I believe, too. And then he got second the next year.
Okay, so obviously a much smaller main event, but win's a win nonetheless. Number 127 in live MTTs for the era he came from is incredible. 10 WSOP bracelets. I mean, it's tied for number 2 on all time. If we're going to go by tournament success, and I think bracelets are a bit of the measure of that, this guy is right in the mix there as one of the all-time greats. Has some history of playing in some of the mixed game stuff in Vegas. I don't think he played too much online, my understanding, so maybe a little bit more of a live pro guy, but I'm not going to hold that against him too much because he's really cemented quite a legacy playing live poker.
Yeah, the case against, kind of intuitive. He dominated at a period that it was a little easier to dominate. But that said, it's to argue against myself, even though I'm the con. It's hard to not do this sometimes. It's much different to be good at poker when he was good at poker. It was a different way to get there. You couldn't just study online and stuff like that or use tools. But the case against, I would say he's mainly been a live tournament player. He did play cash, back in sort of the easy time of poker from probably, when he started until around 2006, 2008, roughly. So does he have the depth and the level of dominance factor that other players do? I'm not so sure about that. But, obviously he's an absolute icon. The reason a lot of people play the game.
Does not being able to pay out your players of your card room, does that factor into your ability as a poker player?
I don't think it does, actually.
Okay.
I don't think it does, but
Okay. That's
definitely good to bring up.
Someone in the chat also mentioned this. It's a good point. Johnny Chan also did play on some of the high stakes cash game shows back in the day, and I do think that a willingness to go into some of these high stakes games on TV and play with the best and duke it out, I think that needs to be added in as a factor that should make people a little bit more. It should elevate your stock a little bit. Just the fact you're even willing to sit in those games and duke it out. We haven't had too many guys on the list so far that have fallen into that category, but I'm sure we're going to get to a bunch of them as we go through the list. All right, next up, Andrew Lichtenberger, Luckychewy, $11.8 million in tournament winnings. That's good for number 77 on the all-time list. Does have some relatively impressive wins along the way. He won a 100K. I think it was an Alpha 8 at some point here. Has I think 2 bracelets, 1 or 2 bracelets. I think only 1 bracelet now that I think about it. I should have written that one down. Regardless, okay, case for Chewy. Played a lot of different game types, heads up, cash, tournaments, played all of them. Loves the game. Really deep into trying to figure out the correct decision at all times. I think he's managed to play consistently through his career. It's been 10, 15 years. He was playing at a very high level right out of the gate in college. Maybe he's not playing in those same tiers today, but at the same time, plays at a very high level, still a threat in your game, still someone you don't want to see at your table, and has managed to keep up with the games at a high level, and a lot of people haven't managed to do that.
Yeah, for sure. If I were to make a case against, I would kind of just say he, while a great player, beyond great, honestly, he hasn't really been in that elite group too often. There have been a handful of periods where you could argue he was, but I don't think many people would argue he's, one of the elite tournament players today. In like, the highest stakes. I don't think he has been elite in sort of the online cash streets in a while. And he is mainly like a big bet, mainly no limit hold'em specialist. So I think for him to make the top 20, he really has to be cream of the crop in either or both high stakes tournaments or high stakes cash. And I'm not sure he's had quite that staying power in either category. Moving on to TJ Cloutier, 10.4 million in live earnings, 6 WSOP bracelets, tied for number 9. Definitely one of the more older school guys on this list. It's my turn to make the pro argument. I got to be honest. I don't know too much about TJ.
Let me handle this one. Let me take this one. Okay. His stats for his generation of play are incredible. Over $10 million in earnings, mainly small stakes buy-ins. He's cracked the top 100 of all-time live tournaments playing not the biggest of stakes, especially not in recent years. Didn't have a chance to run up the score on all these high rollers that are going on constantly. 6 WSOP bracelets is incredibly impressive. It's, tied for 9th all time. These are some phenomenal results in tournaments. And he's also got a meme of him as a cookie. And I think that should at least carry some weight when we're talking about greatest poker players of all time.
Yeah, memes are definitely a factor here. All right, so moving on. I like the pace. This is the pace we need to go at. Roughly 1 per minute. Garrett Adelstein, absolute live cash game crusher over the past 5-6 years. I think he's kind of who the people look up to as perhaps the best and best known live high stakes player at the moment. He also was definitely an absolute crusher online back in sort of the boom years, like 2000. I don't know exactly when he started, but roughly 2005 until like 2011, 12. He was G-Man online, I believe. And I mean, he definitely played high stakes tournaments. Used to be, I remember watching his content on some other trading sites back in the day, and he's just a super savvy guy. Super good feel for the game, and he plays very exploitative, which there's something to be said for having success with that approach.
My argument against Garrett would be that, look, no one's going to doubt that he's one of the greatest live game cash players in the Southern California area ever. But what does that mean, really, right? No tournaments, no mixed games. I don't think he plays PLO, no public games. What do I really have to know about Garrett other than he did well online back in the day, and the fact that a lot of people love him for his, live poker play. Sure, a lot of great hands he's played, but where are the graphs? Where are the earnings? Where is any other game type other than just playing in cash games in LA?
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, next person, Chip Reese, $4 million in earnings, good for number 371 in live MTTs. Mike, the case for.
Yeah, I mean, he's another iconic player. I mean, the 50K Poker Players Championship, which is sort of the mixed game championship tournament that a lot of people sort of look to as one of the sort of most important, prestigious ones to win. That trophy is now named after him because he was, a great all-around player in these game types. What about your case against?
Just one other thing I would note about him, I on the pro side, I think a lot of people viewed him as a truly phenomenal cash game player as well. And I also want to just kind of say as a general note, once we get down to our final 20, I think we should do a little bit more of a deep dive on some of the stuff like the cash games people played, the thoughts of their peers, all that kind of stuff. I think that would help us with putting together these cases. Obviously, 100 people, we can't do that. But the case against, he didn't really have. Again, it's like one of those things where it's like, what kind of public records do I really have of the success Chip has had? People say he's good in cash games, but again, what does that mean? Relatively small volume of tournaments. I mean, he won 3 bracelets, but he won them over 30 years. How much of those was he playing? 2 of his bracelets were not even 100K scores. Those are extremely small events. So I would say that if I compare him to some of the other guys, even of his generation, not nearly the same success in that time span that some of the other guys that, your Johnny Chans, even your TJ Cloutier, not nearly the same success as those guys. So it kind of boils down to how good was he in a lot of these different cash game formats.
Yeah, makes sense. So then moving on to Jennifer Harman. 2 WSOP bracelets, 2.7 million in live earnings, staple in places like Bobby's Room and high stakes games for a long time. I'll just go ahead and take the pro argument. We're not going in the exact right order, but we're doing our best. So she was someone who battled against Andy Beal in those corporation games years and years ago. Are perhaps one of the highest. I mean, for the long time, it was the highest stakes poker game that has ever run. These days, there might be some games that eclipse it, but she was in there, playing for an absolutely outrageous amount of money, competing against, in a very male-dominated environment for a long time and performing very well. What would be your case against?
My case against would be I think she just had such a brief stint at the higher stakes games, or even maybe playing very consistently. My understanding is that she really started playing in early 2000s, maybe around the year 2000, and by 2007, I think she was kind of done. I mean, look, like 7-year career, it can be a long time in poker years, but is that really the length of resume that we should have for someone that's going to end up in the top 20? I feel like it's probably just not enough career there for us to put her in that vicinity.
Sure. Yeah. If we're talking top 10 limit hold'em players, I think she might crack the list, but yeah, time to move on.
It's going to be kind of brutal, by the way, talking to all these people that these are my peers. I chat with a lot of these people all the time. It's like, so Doug, what's up with the case against, huh?
Hey, you had to do it. It's the format. The format forced your hand. All right, moving on to Jason Mercier. I would love to hear you make the case for Mercier. Sorry, I said it the French way, I think. Yeah. So what would be your case for Jason Mercier? Almost 20 million in live earnings, 5 WSOP bracelets.
The case for is that Jason has played a very wide array of games. He's played a lot of mixed games. He's won bracelets there. He's played online mixed games. He's played online cash games. His background was No Limit Full Ring back in the day. I played a lot with Jason. Tournaments, the whole shebang. The guy's played all of it. He's been a good reg in all of those games. What else is there to say? The guy's a crusher. He's crushed it. He's in every one of these formats, relatively speaking. He's been a winner. Lots of bracelets, 20 million winning, 20 million lifetime earnings, 5 WSOP bracelets. And frankly, I don't even think the guy tried that hard for a lot of this.
Yeah, he really did seem to be a very much into it player, from what I understand. I mean, I remember a strong case against is one hand that was publicly shown that someone in chat just brought up, where he I think it was the 100K on Stars or whatever. He was streaming it on Jason Somerville's channel, and he just like 4-bet ripped ace 10 off in a spot that it's not a thing at all. Kind of a clear call, honestly. But it's just you see some of the punts he kind of pulled off. When you really examine his game, it's hard to kind of put him in the absolute top. I mean, he's obviously a great player with amazing success. But another thing against is he hasn't really been playing much these days. He's kind of and you could argue he's moved on to brighter things, which a lot of players do. But I just don't think it's enough to get him into the top 20.
Also, one of the all-time greatest sweats that summer with him and Vanessa Selps, where Vanessa bet against him to win 3 bracelets. He wins 2 relatively early in the series. And then I think was there a second place down the stretch or something? There was some very close calls.
He played a bunch of like 100-player tournaments, and so I'm sure he had another final table or 2, right? Like almost certainly. So yeah, the sweat was real for Vanessa there. What was she on the hook for there if he pulled it off?
I don't remember. It was
some ridiculous amount.
It was a ridiculous number.
Maybe like 3 million or something, but don't quote me on that. All right, moving on to the winner of the first biggest poker tournament ever, the $1 million one drop. He won the first one, Antonio Esfandiari, aka the Magician, a really great nickname that I'm glad stuck. What would be your pro case for Antonio? Or I'm sorry, you just did Mercier, but let's just go for it.
I see how it is, Mike. The pro case for Antonio is the guy is not afraid to play the way that he needs to play regardless of the stakes. Came into the biggest tournament ever, got it done, didn't play like a bitch. He put people in spots, he lagged it up, and he got the job done. Antonio has been a staple of a lot of the high stakes cash game shows over the years. He was playing in those back in the mid 2000s. He's playing in them today. He played the heads up duel versus Hellmuth very recently. And sure, he lost, but who hasn't lost to Phil Hellmuth heads up at this point? The guy's been a regular in the high stakes tournaments and cash game scene for a very long time and has posted some solid results playing in those games.
Yeah, I think the case against it is kind of simple. I mean, he's always been, competing at high levels and he's had solid success, but he simply hasn't been a dominant force in any of the games he's really played. He did win that one drop, but that's, a roughly 100-player tournament. Hard to put too much stock into that. He did play, I'm sure he's played some live mixed games, but I haven't heard too much about that. He's played a lot of high stakes live cash, but it's in pretty soft games. I just don't think there's any way he can really crack the top 20. Maybe the top 20 most known though.
The biggest case against is look at his tournament results if you take away the one drop.
Yeah, it gets pretty rough.
That's the real argument against.
But that was a lot of money he hugged in that photo.
Ton of money. Moving on, Brian Rast, $22 million in tournament earnings, good for number 26 lifetime live MTTs, 5 WSOP bracelets, has won the 50K Players Championship. Mike, the case for?
The case for Brian Rast is he's just through the publicly available live tournaments, not even looking at stuff we can't know for sure, like live cash. He has shown really great all-around, skill. He won the Poker Players Championship. That's an 8-game type thing, I believe. Is it 8-game or is it just the?
I think it was 8 and then became 10, but
Yeah, well, the point is a lot of different games, and then he's also had success in tournaments that are just no limit. He's also been in the mix in all high stakes live MTTs and for a while high stakes live cash. What would be your case against Mr. Rast?
The case against would be that he won a lot of money, my understanding, in the Macau games. How tough was it really to be one of the first American pros out there just scooping up money with a net? And then when he got back to the U.S., people viewed him as pretty spewy. I think he earned the name Brian Blast in Macau, but he certainly kept that going in the U.S. streets. And I remember some tournaments where Brian put it in with, you think the ace-10 hand from Mercier was bad? Oh, let me tell you some Brian Rast stories and some of the tournaments this guy played. And maybe it was part of the strategy, try and run up a stack and put people in some spots, but can certainly be a little bit on the spewy side. And I wonder what his results really would look like playing in a lot of the high roller events.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Moving on. I think you might skip.
Can I also just say though, like just to say a good thing here, he's played a lot of mixed games. He was one of the original people in the big bet mixed game that was running at Aria. and the guy has an ability to play a lot of games well. Smart guy, and not someone that you can run over easily. Going to put you in spots. Loves the game. So just wanted to get those things in for Brian Rast.
Yeah, for sure. He deserves it. I think you might have skipped one on our list here, Doug. Huckseed. He was right before Brian Rast. 7.7 million in live earnings, 157 in live MTTs for WSOP bracelets, including the main. I don't think I'm misremembering that. I'm almost certain he won the main, right?
I believe so.
Let me fact check myself real quick.
Right.
Okay, confirmed. 1996 WSOP main. Sorry for the delay. So the case for Huckseed, he was another old school guy that had a lot of success, back before it was kind of easy to get pretty good at poker and there was a lot of info out there. He did play online. I'm not sure quite how much, though. Perhaps chat can sort of supplement my knowledge there. But just to quickly move on, what would be your case against?
So the case against Huck is he definitely played a variety of games, but how many did he play at an actual top tier level? I would say almost none of them. He played poker through one of the easier eras, starting in the late or early 90s all the way to 2016 or so in his tournament results. Relatively impressive. 8 million in earnings, 157 live MCs, 4 WSP bracelets, all relatively impressive. But the thing is, you can just find a number of people in that same era that just straight up did better than him in all of those. And then what else does Huckseed have going for him? What was he killing it in a lot of the mixed games? If he was, then maybe that can change my opinion here a little bit. But hard to see how he would come in ranking ahead of some of these same guys from the same rough era of time.
Right. Yeah. All right, moving on to, I know a lot of people are going to like this one, Stu Ungar. Stewie. I really hate that it's falling on me to make the case against, but go ahead and you make your case for.
So the case for Stu Ungar, one of the first, I would use the word wizard. People probably of the era viewed him as a wizard. One of those younger kids always seemed to make the right play. $4 million-ish in earnings, 3.7 million in earnings. Again, for that time, pretty incredible. 5 WSOP bracelets. Again, a little easier to win those then, so maybe that doesn't quite mean as much. His final tournament he ever played was winning the main event. What a way to go out. $1 million up top main event, wins it when he needed to make ends meet. If he had not had died young, or relatively young, I should say, this guy would absolutely be in the same stratosphere as Hellmuth or Doyle. If he had had the years to kind of put together the resume, but it was tragically cut short. And the reality is that he would have absolutely played at that tier for a very long time, based on what it seems his ability was. Obviously, it's a little bit before our time. And I guess my last pro would be the guy just has legends of hands that he played. Like there's some hand where like he had one of his cards flipped up and like played a huge pot deep in some tournament, and some guy tried to bluff him and he called him down with like the 10 high or something. Urban legend stuff, Mike. Had to have been real.
Had to have been real. If I had to make the case against Stu, I would say while he was, extremely successful and very dominant, he sort of had a lot of things going off the felt that prevented him from really focusing on the game of poker specifically. Part of that is because he was good at other games. I know he was a great gin rummy player. And that's maybe how he started his role initially. But there were several big gaps in years where he just like didn't really play much at all. I mean, I'm not like a Stu Ungar historian here, but I'm pretty sure there was like a solid gap of like maybe roughly 1990 to like 1998 where he really was not playing much public facing poker. It really does pain me to make the case against, because the guy's like obviously an absolute legend. But honestly, it's hard for me to even make any more points against him.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Moving on. Actually, you want to start?
Yeah. So Mikhail Thuritz, I believe is how you pronounce this. His online name is Chow Ren. He's got 1.9 million in the live earnings, but he's definitely more of an online guy. Both cash and tournaments, he's gotten in the mix. Definitely a lot of online cash. I'm not super familiar with his actual online results. So maybe we abandon the pro con format for a
I'll,
minute
I'll
here.
just
Let's
I'll just
talk
field
one
this
out.
one because I've played
Yeah.
versus him a decent amount and I know a little bit about him. So Swedish guy, background was playing in online at first. One of the other first guys to move to Macau, played a ton in the private Macau games where he made a lot of his money around a bunch of his bankroll. Has played a bunch of No Limit online, has played some PLO online, has played a lot of mixed games online, has battled people at the high stakes throughout. I've gotten to play heads up with him a decent amount. Very tricky player, very cunning player. Puts you in weird, tough spots constantly. He's one of those guys it's just tough to play against. Lacked a bit of the fundamentals, and I think his history kind of, you can see with that. He's played on the live poker. He's played in all these different varieties. So maybe he's not technically quite as sound as some of the people that would have been experts in each individual game types, but an absolute legend online and in the Macau streets, and a very difficult player to play against. Now, the thing for him is I'll just do both in this one. The thing for him is he hasn't played a lot of tournaments, hasn't played a lot of stuff that you can see. So he's one of those guys that you might not even really know ever existed. If you're just someone that's following poker today and you watch your high roller events or your whatever you're watching. But certainly one of those guys that was kind of behind the scenes, definitely a great player.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to Jason Koon. Koon was his screen name, 34 million in live earnings. I'll go ahead and make the case for. He's one of those guys that has just been in the solver streets and even before then was at the top of the game for a long time. He's kind of always been at the forefront, always considered one of the elite players at particularly No Limit Hold'em, both cash and live tournaments, particularly live tournaments, because that's sort of where a lot of the froth is in the high stakes arena these days. And he's definitely maintained that status for the last 10 years or so. What would you say against Koon if you had to?
I'd say the case against Koon is he's not branched out outside No Limit Hold'em basically at all. He only plays No Limit Hold'em, definitely plays it at a high level, but he hasn't managed to branch out. And I'd also say it took him quite a bit to get to that top tier. He'd played for a long time before he started to kind of break through into the higher tier No Limit Hold'em level. Plenty of guys that was true as well, but I would say Koon's probably not as much of a natural poker talent like some of the other guys. He had to put in the hard work and spend the time to get there. If you put this guy in a game where he had to make up the rules and play poker, I probably wouldn't want to take Koon over some of the other people on this list. I feel like they would probably be a little bit more able to just jump into a game and be able to win. So if it's a hardworking award, I would put Koon in my top 20. But if it's like a poker ability, just natural award, I wouldn't have him in there.
Yeah, fair enough. That said, he has, as Chad is correcting us, he has played some short decks, so that's one other game type that he's gotten in the mix for. But what is that?
How different is short deck? Okay, the deuces
exactly
aren't in there, but how much different? By the way, guys, I like Jason. People in the chat, Jesus, I have to make the case again. I can't be like, well, he's just great. Mike, back to
you. we would get through this podcast a lot faster if we did it that way, for sure.
Okay, Ben Lamb, $14 million in earnings, number 55 in live tournaments, played a lot of mixed games, played a lot in the higher stakes scene in Vegas and cash games. Mike, the case for Ben Lamb.
He's one of those guys who, while he has had a lot of success at the highest levels of big bet games, especially No Limit Hold'em, he's also been in the mix in the mix games. He's definitely considered one of the better players in that arena. Has played all game types quite a bit over the years. What would be your case against?
So I think that Ben's kind of the opposite of Koon in a lot of ways, where I feel like Koon is one of those guys that will always put in the hours to make sure he's good. I feel like Ben Lamb is the kind of guy that just naturally is just sharper than people in a lot of gambling games, but I just don't think that he has the skill set that it takes to play at an absolute top tier level, because you need to have discipline. And, maybe he has that, but he's just never really displayed it because he tends to find spots and try to make money. Again, nothing wrong with that in poker. That's the way that a lot of people make their money. But he's not someone that I would have ever put in, oh my God, Ben Lamb's at my table, this is really bad for me. He's just one of those guys that tends to be sharp pretty quickly in games, but maybe not ever get to that top level.
Sure. All right, moving on to Someone who we don't even know their real name. Chad, if you can supplement our knowledge here, we'd really appreciate it. Berri Sweet.
Very sweets. Very sweets.
Berri Sweets. I thought it was.
Sweet.
It doesn't matter. I thought it was singular, but it's not a big deal.
Apparently, we don't even know his online name.
I thought it was Berri Sweet, but
you're right. It's very sweet.
So the case for Berri Sweet, all we know is his online, what his avatar looks like and who he's playing in that arena. But he's one of those guys who every single thing he's done online, he's dominated. I don't think he spent like a ton of time in tournaments. I'm sure he plays the frothy ones like the 5K W Coop main and all that. And I'd be surprised if he hasn't had some success. But the real crown jewel of like sort of who he is his ability to play cash games, and particularly heads up. I mean, he's one of those guys who, and I say one of those guys, but he might be the only person who's done something exactly like this, where he played everyone at PLO, mashed everyone at PLO, didn't get action anymore, started playing everyone at no limit, mashed everyone at no limit, didn't get so much action anymore, and then eventually moved on to like mixed games and started mashing people there. He's just shown a real ability to pick up different game types, particularly in heads up, and just absolutely mash them.
And what he's been doing lately in No Limit Hold'em is incredible. This guy has been playing all of the top players in heads at No Limit in the world. He's been duking it out with Linus every day. He's been playing a bunch of other guys, Make Boy Finn, a bunch of other people that are kind of some of the top names in the online Hold'em street, No Limit Hold'em streets, and just battling them at heads up, No Limit every single day. And relatively speaking, holding his own. I don't know what the record is against those guys, but you think about it like this, guys. He's playing people who played No Limit Hold'em as their main game type for their entire career. He's just transitioning over from PLO or mixed games or whatever he's playing to playing against the actual top people in No Limit Hold'em and just managing to even be in there. And he never quits anybody. I don't think he's ever quit anybody. It seems like he just plays the same guy every single day. When people quit him, when that match ends, it's because they didn't want to play Berri anymore.
Right. Yeah, he's got the heart.
Incredible.
Someone did say his name. I obviously can't confirm this. It's just chat, but someone said Frederick Anderson with 2 S's, of course.
Sounds like an Anderson name.
Yeah, so maybe that's his name. I can't confirm.
Norwegian?
Sure.
Is he Norwegian?
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's something. It's Scandi something, I think.
I thought he was Scandi, but I wouldn't bet my life on it.
The case against is that we don't know his name. And so what has he ever done outside of playing online heads up?
Right. Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. All right, moving on to David Peters, D. Peters, 39 million in live earnings, number 4 all time in live MTTs. What would you say is the case for him?
The case for David Peters is pretty clear cut. This guy is one of the absolute best tournament players ever. Played for many years, consistently good. He's kind of like a younger Seidel to me, in that he's just always in the game winning, just silently. You don't see him in the lineup. I played a decent amount with him, and I kind of forget he was there, but then you realize he is because he's winning your money. Number 4 all time in tournaments. Just to be on that list is to be that high on the list is incredible. I just one of the all time great tournament players. It's just simple as that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Kind of going back for the con argument, going back to what we were saying earlier about Jake Schindler and Nick Petrangelo, he kind of is one of those, absolutely has dominated one thing in particular, No Limit Hold'em tournaments. I'm sure he's dabbled in other things, but the real thing he's become elite at is No Limit Hold'em tournaments. Nothing wrong with that, but I think when it comes to this list, you're comparing versus people like, Stu Ungar and people who have played a bunch of different game types and people who have just shown overall more total dominance across multiple game types. I think he just doesn't quite make the cut as great of a live tournament and online tournament player as he is.
The other thing I would say, just to separate him a little bit, think about Jake Schindler and Nick Petrangelo, is they're both also good cash game players and they play a lot of cash. I don't think that's the case for David Peters. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but a little bit more tournament focused, but also a little bit better tournament results if we look lifetime.
I mean, 4 all time really is insane, especially considering he wasn't really in the 250Ks back in the day and stuff. He might be playing that stuff a little bit more now, but he wasn't in them from the start. Also, what I remember, at least
in the top 10, 15, 20 names in the all-time money list, I feel like he's just so under the radar compared to other guys, and he's just number 4. Yeah.
Isn't his nickname the Silent Assassin? I think it might be.
No, that's Seidel. That's Seidel.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry.
unless I'm wrong.
Well, he's very quiet is the point. That's why I thought his nickname was that. Moving on to Abe Mosseri. This is one that I think some people will remember from the big game a while back. He was on that. That was kind of the main thing I think that he was sort of in the public eye about. 2.3 million in earnings, number 13 biggest winner ever on high stakes DB, that's quietly doing that. And it's mostly in mixed games. I think pretty much all in mixed games. I don't think he really ever got in the big bet streets like PLO, Nolan Hold'em. He's just been extremely successful in those game types, both live and online. Has won some tournaments, but I don't think that's really been his focus. He's always been more of a live mixed game cash guy playing at the highest stakes. One of those guys who's spent a lot of time in Bobby's room and such stuff like that. What would be your case against him?
Well, the thing about Abe is he's one of the most well-rounded players on the list, and I guess the case against would be which things is he truly great at. He did play a lot in Bobby's room, but what kind of results did he even have there? We don't get to know that kind of thing. My guess would be that he was a very good mixed game player, but wouldn't be able to play at a high level in some of these no limit game types that are extremely competitive. Not to say the mixed games aren't competitive. Of course, a lot of great players in the mixed game room, but it's such a small player pool. When has Abe really tested himself in something outside of mixed games that we can see? But I mean, honestly, I think Abe is a great player. I was surprised he was so high on the full tilt rankings. I didn't realize that. He's definitely been winning in a lot of these mixed games formats. He's won 2 WSB bracelets, playing basically everything other than no limit hold'em, looks like. So, I think he's definitely a top 100 player and another one of those guys that you might not hear a lot about, but definitely a great poker player.
Yeah, number 13 on high stakes CB. That's really sneaky. Like I would not have thought he was there. That's pretty impressive. Moving on to, I believe, our second upswing coach on the list, Alex Canu 7 Miller, UK player. He's number 20 and number 32 on the high stakes DB list. I believe that's his full tilt name and his stars name. I guess you can make the case for. You've played a lot with Alex.
Yeah, I played a lot with Alex. Very good no limit hold'em cash game player online. One of the absolute top dogs for many years. In every high six max game running, the guy was in there. He was winning on full tilt. He was winning on stars. He was winning the toughest lineups possible. He was ahead of the curve on using solvers to learn how to play correctly. And he was just a consistently top tier cash game reg in all of those games online. And heads up as well. I mean, he's also a great heads up player. Very, very tough heads up player. I mean, he beat the shit out of me when we played heads up for many years. So absolute top notch online no limit hold'em player.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the case against is kind of mirroring a lot of the cases we made against certain people on this list where, there's nothing wrong with this in your career. It's actually often a good move, but he really has been quite narrow in scope. I mean, he's one of those guys that it's actually kind of hard to even find photos of him playing live poker, because he's played so little, like high stakes live tournaments, high stakes live cash, like in the public eye and stuff like that. He really has been mainly no limit hold'em. I think maybe a bit of PLO, but mainly no limit hold'em, 6 max and heads up. He's dominated those game types, but that is, a relatively narrow scope, and that definitely has to be factored in. Moving on to Ashton Griffin. Ashman is his online screen name. Number 10 winner of all time on high stakes DB. I'm not super familiar with Ashton. I've obviously heard his name, but this is one of those guys that I had to do a bit of Googling beforehand. Yeah, so
I'll take this one.
Yeah, cool.
So for you guys that don't know Ashman, this is a few years ago now. Ashman was always a little bit on the degen side with bankroll management and playing aggressive, and he had one of the truly most extraordinary weeks of poker ever. I mean, this might be the number one week anyone's ever had in online poker history. He won $10 million in pot limit Omaha in 1 week. Maybe it was 8 million. It was 8 to 10. It's probably the biggest winning week any person has ever had online. It's at least in the conversation. I don't know how many people won more than that in 1 week. He's played Super I6 PLO, Super I6 No Limit, and he's one of those guys where it's sort of peak versus consistency. Where absolute peak Ashman, he was an unstoppable force online that was winning in everything he played. Didn't have the longevity. Didn't play a lot of live poker. Didn't seem to do well in the live tournament scene, but it's more a homage to just how truly incredible that run up was over that week of playing in some of these high stakes games.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. All right, next up, Nicholas Heineker. This is Reagan, right?
Reagan 70, correct.
Yeah, so I'm sure some people in the chat that I'm reading from right now are going to love this because they don't like the old, quote unquote, old school online guys, apparently. But Reagan was one of those guys who just absolutely dominated online, mainly heads up, I believe, as well. But he kind of did dabble in six max as well, right?
He played. Okay, so he played. This is the story for him. He mainly played six max coming up. He became one of the best six max players on Stars. He started to play a bunch of heads up as well. I battled him a lot of heads up. We had some pretty hilarious 20-50 deep matches that we duked it out for a while. He then went on an incredible heater playing in a lot of the Malaysia games in like 2013, 14, something like that. Ran up a big bankroll online. He'd been winning as well beforehand, but then that took it to the next level. He played a bunch of incredible hands. There was one that I think he had like King Queen on Ace 8-8, and he called someone's triple barrel down because when they tripled, it represented only like a few hands, and the guy was bluffing, and it was just an epic hand from the Malaysia 400-800 games. Then he essentially quit online, started playing some triple draw, played a bunch of the triple draw games in Vegas, played a bunch of high rollers, went on an epic high roller tear, won millions of dollars in high rollers over an extremely short period of time, played a bunch of the high stakes games in Vegas, and then he was kind of out. And again, it's one of those peak versus consistency to kind of arguments, but when this guy was on that run, he seemed unbeatable. He was winning in every single game that he played, online, live, ring, heads up, you name it, triple draw, no limit, tournaments. The guy just smashed everybody, and it was a very short window of time, but it was a truly incredible period of time. Yeah, I'm obviously going to be a little bit biased towards some of these stories because I was there for them. So it's kind of hard to not have a bias, even in just knowing what happened in some of these.
Sure, but I think it's valuable, especially for someone. He did kind of fly under the radar as far as the public eye goes. Like, you know, if you were in the mix in the poker world, you knew who Reagan was. But I think it's good that you're sort of sharing your perspective on those types of guys. And I'm going to mainly let you sort of take the reins when we talk about guys like that. Moving on to Sam Greenwood. I believe he's straight money homie, and if he dies, he dies were his main screen names. He is kind of a well-rounded big bet player for sure. He's done well in both online tournaments, live tournaments, some online cash. I'm sure quite a bit of live cash as well, although that's hard to say for sure. Do you have anything to add about Greenwood in general?
I really don't have much knowledge about Greenwood. If you just want to tackle both sides of this one, that would probably be good.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be so easy for me either. But yeah, I mean, the case for
anyone whose background is online tournaments is getting a real disservice today.
Yeah, well, what can you do? I mean, the people's voice is going to be heard, you know, and there are plenty of online tournament players in there, so it'll be fine.
He also does have $22 million in live tournament earnings. So it's not like this is a nothing burger there. Good for 25th on all-time list. That's very impressive. It's a lot of earnings. It's high in the list.
Yeah, when it comes to public results, Greenwood stuff is amazing. Like stuff you can actually look up, like online tournament results and live tournament results. He's done amazing at that in all of those arenas. If I had to make a case against, knowing the not so much I know about him, while he is, you know, a quite top player, I don't think you could really argue that he's, you know, top 5-ish of tournament players. I mean, he might be close, but I'm not positive. And if you're not even cracking the top 5 tournament players, I think it's kind of tough to crack the top 20 all-time poker players. But again, grain of salt. Not super familiar with Sam Greenwood. So moving on to Billy Baxter, another old school legend, 7 World Series of Poker bracelets, which is tied for 7 of all time. How much do you know about Billy Baxter?
Very little. I did some Googling earlier to try and understand his background a little bit more. You know, very, very old school player. Obviously, 7 WSB bracelets is extremely impressive. It seems like he's a deuce to 7 draw specialist. A lot of his bracelets were won in that event, which, you know, pros and cons there. It means that he was clearly one of the best deuce to 7 draw players, but also at the same time didn't really find much success outside of those things. And when you look at his bracelets, they were mainly in extremely small fields. I mean, you know, these were not large fields that were played here. So, you know, it's one of those guys where I feel like if there were hands available today that we could look at, and we had more way of knowing what happened, maybe we could kind of give him a little bit more credit. But really, all we can say is that the guy has 7 WSOP bracelets. He was he's in the Poker Hall of Fame. He's was a successful Deuce 7 player. But what else can I really say about that kind of player? It's sort of tough with people like this on the list, to be honest with you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to Connor Drinan, 2 World Series of Poker bracelets. Mainly a tournament guy, from what I understand. How much do you know about Connor?
Connor's primarily been a tournament player, a little bit of cash games as well. He actually played a good chunk of heads up PLO. I battled him a bunch in those games. He was a fairly strong heads up PLO player, I would say. A very, very strong tournament player. Very good results in the events that he has played. I think that he's kind of not played as much in the last few years. Also,
I believe he was a top heads up sit and go player for a while as well, though that's not really the game type that lends itself the most to skill, I have to say, as a former heads up sit and go reg myself. Oh, yeah.
Don't sell yourself short here, Mike.
14 big blind heads up, not so much going on there in terms of thinking.
Yeah, but anyway, back to Connor. 12 million lifetime cash, lifetime earnings, good for 78th in the all-time list. So also strong there. Good chunk of cash game play as well across a couple different game types. So I wouldn't say that I think he's well-rounded, but I do think he's someone that not just a one-trick pony like some of the other players on the list.
Sure. All right, moving on to John Hennigan. I believe that's Johnny World is his nickname. My first exposure to John Hennigan, kind of random, was that really crappy poker movie All In, where he is in it but does not play himself. He plays like just some Russian guy, which is pretty interesting.
I don't know what we're talking about.
Super random. It was a really crappy poker movie back in the day. But Johnny World is a player who's been in the mix, I think, since like the early 90s, maybe even, I think early 90s roughly. He's definitely played a lot of different game types, has had success at big bet games like No Limit and PLO, but he's also done really well. And I think it might have even been more his bread and butter in the mixed games and stuff like that. I'll give you a break since you've been making the pro and con case for a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and make the con case for Johnny World as well. While he is like a great old school player that deserves basically nothing but respect, he just simply hasn't been really elite at many points. I think there are some points where you could probably argue that he was elite, but he definitely hasn't had staying power in terms of, being elite. And he really just can't be put above most of the other like old school guys on the list that have definitely showed more domination.
Sounds good. Mike, I'm looking at this and I think we should audible our strategy slightly today.
You want to get through this a little faster, I reckon.
I think we should do half the list today. What do you think about that?
Half the list when?
Or do you want to go faster?
We can go faster because people can use Google themselves when they're voting and stuff.
Because we're about an hour-ish in and we've done about 29 names. So I'm looking at about 3.5, 4 hours. And look, I love the pro and con case as much as everyone else does, but maybe we just kind of blast through these a little bit then. You want to go half? You want to go half and go in depth, or you want to do full and then we'll just let people?
I think full. I don't want to make people listen to 2 different pods just to hear the whole full rundown of the list. So let's make this more of a communal thing between you and I in the chat. We'll run through our list here, kind of just rattle off some quick accomplishments. We might spend a little bit more time on certain players who it makes sense to spend time on, but if it's a player that's really well known, I think we can kind of just breeze through them. I think.
And I'll start that off with Scott Seiver, 3 WSB bracelets. Obviously talented on many forms of poker. One of the all-time best in-hand talkers. The guy is chatting away in basically all these different spots, trying to get his opponent to do different things, which is a skill that I think almost no players have. I don't know how many guys might really chat in hands, especially in the river.
It's pretty impressive, honestly. Yeah, not many have the confidence to do that.
So the case for Scott would be that he has been a good player for many, many years in all kinds of poker, online, live, tournaments, ring, mixed games, been all over the place. And I think you can kind of put him in just about any game, and within not that long, Scott would be a strong player in the game.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to the second upswing poker member of all time, Ali Imsirovic, who has been absolutely... Is it Ali, actually? So, my apologies to you, sir.
I like Ali, but I'm wrong.
He has been, honestly, it's crazy. Like the way he has just went from playing like 5-L 8 years ago or whatever it was, 7 years ago, and now he's just mashing the highest stakes live tournaments, and also mashing online tournaments and some online cash. It's just incredibly impressive. He's one of those guys that really is demonstrating like how you can almost certainly succeed in poker these days, which is like, from what I understand, he wakes up early every morning and like studies sims for hours and just absolutely treats it like the profession that you should treat it if you want to play poker at the highest level. The case against is pretty simple. I mean, he's mainly been just Nolan Hold'em, some PLO, and he really has only been around for a small amount of time. It's kind of like when you have an amazing player in like a traditional sport like basketball or whatever, where, you know, arguing that someone's the greatest player ever like 3 or 4 years into their career, it's tough to do that. They just need to demonstrate more staying power. So I think down the line, he's certainly going to be in the discussion. And he already is arguably in the discussion for best live tournament player.
He's literally in discussion right now.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I agree across the board. Only 3 years of high stakes, though. He's gonna need a little bit more time to, I think, to really cement himself. Unless you think that he's just good enough already. I mean, that would be the case, that this guy is playing the Poker Go events at an absolute top level. So maybe you think he's already there. Next up, John Juanda, $25 million in tournament earnings, number 25. Good for number 21 on that list. Also, 5 WSOP bracelets, tied for 17th. Played a lot of cash games as well. What do you think, Mike? John Juanda.
I mean, he's another, you know, I feel like I'm repeating myself so many times, but that's naturally going to happen. He's another old school legend. I mean, the guy was in the mix in a lot of different game types, but I think mainly no limit and stuff for sort of the poker boom years. Yeah, I don't have too much to say about that.
I think what's kind of interesting about him is he has a sneaky amount of money won in live tournaments and bracelets, I think, for just how little he's played in the last, I don't know, it seems like probably 5 or 10 years. I haven't seen that much from John Juanda in some time. I remember hearing a lot about him when I first started playing poker 10, 15, 20 years ago. But, you know, if you look at his results, he hasn't cashed a tournament in about 3 years. And a lot of these results really came in the early 2000 to late 2000 era. So consistent, successful results over a fairly long period of time. For an older guy, that's pretty impressive. And then, of course, he's also just played in a lot of different games that people have heard about. So certainly a big name as well on the list.
For sure. Plus, he did have trips. Moving on to Andrew Robl, kind of came up in the poker boom years, but has definitely had that staying power in the post-solver era. That said, that staying power has mainly been in the live cash arena. That has almost certainly been the most lucrative path he could have taken, so good for him. But when it comes to, you know, trying to crack a top 20 list, I think that kind of ends up hurting you a little bit when you do take that path, because you simply don't have the sort of public results to bolster your case.
He's a tough one. Because, you know, gun to head, is Andrew Robl my top 20 all-time poker players? Yes. But then if you said why, I just think he is. Right. Because I know he's played in a lot of these games.
Having played with him and seen the hands he played, he's clearly like incredibly tough. And if we were somehow able to quantify like overall skill, and that's what we were ranking here, I can't imagine him not cracking the top 20.
The hand he played against Matt Kirk in that high roller cash game that one day, where it was like a 5-bet pot and they both had nothing, and it went like bet jam on the flop or the turn. I can't remember. Basically, it was just two guys with sandwiches just going to town for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he just finally jams on Matt. Matt has to fold his air ball.
Yeah, amazing.
It's one of the best hands of televised poker of all time. He's also played on a bunch of high stakes cash games. He still does have $6-ish million in live earnings, so it's certainly not nothing. But an all-time legend of the cash game streets, just straight up. Okay, next guy, Amarillo Slim. Again, we're looking at a situation where a player that I'm not very familiar with. Mike, did you do much research about Amarillo Slim coming into today?
Oh man, he's one of those names that even just the name is epic, and it's like that almost alone, just how sweet his name is, he needs to be mentioned, you know. But he really is one of those old school guys that when it was competing, when the World Series of Poker main event was sort of it still is the main stage of poker, but it was one of the only big stages that poker had, and the tournament only got like 100 players or whatever. So, you know, I hate holding that sort of a thing against people, but it's just hard for me to argue even that he can crack the top 20 given sort of the era he played in and just how long he was in the mix.
It's just so hard, man, to give a lot of the older players spots when you just have so little. There's so little information about them. I can see that they won a WSB bracelet, and I can see that people in the chat talk about them, and I can maybe find one hand on ESPN from Johnny Chan or something. You know what I'm saying? It's there's so little to go off of. How much depth do we really need to be able? I know
it's really tough.
It's really difficult to compare.
I think now that said, what you can sort of do is compare to other people from the era. And while I don't want to shout out people who might be coming up or even people that we've already gone through, I think other big, like sort of iconic names from the earliest years of poker, like, the earliest years of sort of like public poker, like the 70s, 60s, etc. He is not ahead of a lot of the other guys on this list who are sort of from the same era and hasn't really had the same like staying power in terms of even how many people know who he is and what his accomplishments are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Brian Hastings. We talked earlier about I already forgot which player. I think it might have been Reagan, but someone who won just an absolutely ridiculous amount of money in a small amount of time. Talk about winning a ridiculous amount of money in a small amount of time. Brian Hastings winning over 4 million, I believe, versus Isselder that day. Granted, some controversy around that with the hand history sharing from other players and stuff like that. But he still played the hands, still made the adjustments, and
actually, I had Cole South on the podcast the other day. Did you catch that one, Mike?
Yeah.
And he talked about that, and he said that they never did share any hands, and that Full Tilt just told them to not say anything while they figured it out, and then basically they never did, essentially. And so by the time they finally said something, too much time had passed. But of course, there still was controversy surrounding it, but I just wanted to set the record straight there on what Cole said the other day. For Hastings, the thing for me is obviously that session versus Isler it's got to be the biggest winning day anyone's ever had in online poker history. $4-ish million in one day versus one opponent. Incredible. Played really high stakes for a very long time. Played no limit hold'em, played PLO, played mixed, played tournaments, good across the board. Number 14 winner ever on high stakes DB, 5 WSOP bracelets. I actually don't even know how much tournament winnings he has. I'm sure that it's at least a reasonable number of million as well. Just been great across the board in all these things.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess yeah, we can just keep going.
Yeah, for sure. We got a roll. We got a roll here, bro.
We got a roll. Okay.
Right. Greg Merson, Greggy, WSOP main event winner, actually won the tournament that was right before that World Series Poker main event too. So he won 2 WSOP tournaments in a row for a ridiculous amount of money. Definitely an extremely, extremely strong tournament player. More of an Intuit guy, I believe. He's not like super on the forefront of cutting edge solver based strategies, certainly. But he's a fantastic tournament player, and also a great cash game player, I believe, as well, right? Like he was in the mix.
He played a lot of cash games before. I'm not sure he played cash games at like a high stakes level. I played a little bit of high stakes cash with him after some of his scores. But $11 million in career earnings, except for 82nd all time on the list. Obviously, the main event's going to be a big portion of that. I wouldn't say that I think he's transitioned over to a little more of cash games these days. He was before the main event as well, but the thing for Greg, and Greg's a friend of mine, but I just don't think that he's going to have the variety of game types played here to really make it to the top 20 list. Winning the main event does put you in a category of poker history where you're kind of all in your own with you and the other 20, maybe 15 guys that have won in modern history. But the reality is I don't know if Greg has done enough outside of that to have really put himself in a reasonable spot for the top 20.
Sure. All right. Tom Marchese, the cheese. I don't know. I mean, I know Tom Marchese. I know Tom Marchese is a great player. I know he's, crushed like tournaments and some cash. I'm not super familiar with, how much he's sort of ventured outside of that arena or even how much cash he's played. Can you speak to that for, let's say, a few seconds?
Sure. So I've known Tom for many years. I haven't talked to him much in the last few, but we kind of came to Vegas around the same period of time. He was one of these kings of cards online. He was one of the best online players around the time I kind of came up. He moved over to playing in live cash, won a lot of the different live cash games in Vegas, Then he also started playing in tournaments. He has $19 million in tournament cash. He's good for 36th all time. Very sharp player. Very cunning player. Honestly, the way that he plays, it reminds me kind of most of Fees, having played with both of them, where I feel like Marchese and Fees both just had this knack of knowing what people are up to at kind of all the time, and then just figuring out creative ways to either exploit them or beat them or know what they should respond with. So I played a decent chunk with Tom. I think he was a great player. I think he was a very tough player. I think he's kind of stepped away from poker a little bit more over the last 5-6 years, but he still does play occasionally.
Yeah, makes sense. One quick aside is, like, when it comes to the online guys, I think a big thing that bolsters their case is if they were crushers before sort of the modern era of poker and have maintained it. I think that's kind of the thing that's going to take a lot of these online guys to the next level. Just something I wanted to throw in there. So moving on to Lane Flack, 6 WSOP bracelets. I got to be honest with you. No offense to Lane Flack. I am quite surprised that he made even this list. I mean, I know he's been very successful in certain arenas, particularly the World Series and like live cash, but don't really think there's been too much going on other than that.
Back-to-back Flack, bro. Back-to-back Flack. Lane Flack actually passed away last year. So it was, and he's been a good poker player. Definitely had some WSP success. 6 bracelets, impressive. $5 million for the kind of stakes that he was playing, also impressive. Is he top 20? I think probably not, but I did want to pay a little bit of homage to someone that was a great poker player who did win many WSOP bracelets that recently had passed away.
Yeah, reasonable. All right, moving on to Michael Addamo, arguably the current best tournament player in the world when it comes to No Limit Hold'em. Absolutely dominant. He's one of those guys that even other amazing players will sort of joke that they're, not afraid to play against them, but that's sort of in the vein of what they're saying. Like he truly is just an absolute monster these days. I do have to say, though, similar to the argument against Ali Imsirovic, while he is extremely dominant right now, and a lot of people consider him the best right now, a lot of people with a ton of credibility who are great tournament players themselves think he is the current best player. It just hasn't been that long that he's been at that space. So I don't think you could really argue he's top 20 all time. It's too tough.
It's kind of tough with live tournaments, because especially high rollers or just tournaments in general, because online you get sort of a clear pecking order. Like, we've somehow not had a lot of online guys yet, but with online you have a pretty clear pecking order because you get to play so many hands where you're like, oh, this guy's better than that guy, this guy's kind of the top dog. With tournaments, it just feels like it's kind of a flavor of the month sort of thing. When someone just goes on a good run, maybe they're a good player, but they also go on a good run. That's when you start to see people that establish themselves at the top of the pack. And then guess what? Next year, someone else goes on a good run. It might not even be that they get good hands or they win all ins, or like they just get lucky in situations that they get bluffs through or get thin value or whatever it is. So kind of hard with that aspect of it too. I need to see multiple years of top tier play before I'm ready to write.
Yeah. Exactly. I think one of the strongest arguments for him is just simply sort of the social proof around other people who are very good and have had that staying power, sort of giving him the credit. But anyway, moving on to Ben Tollerine, Ben 86. He is one of those guys that has had really solid staying power in the game. But from sort of, I said modern era earlier, I sort of meant the solver era. But when I said that, he's been one of those guys who was dominating before then, and he's still been doing well. Definitely, would you say he's more of a PLO guy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so he's number 4 and 15 on the all-time HSDB rankings. He's also cashed for a good amount in live tournaments. I think he's somewhere around $9-10 million in live cashes as well. I think he certainly played both, but definitely a PLO expert for many years. One of the top heads up PLO guys. Also won a lot of money playing in the ring PLO streets. If this was a PLO only ranking, this guy would easily be top 5, maybe even top 3. The question I think for Ben is really, when you step away from PLO, we look at playing in live poker. We look at maybe some tournament results given the buy-ins that he played. Does he kind of crack into that top 20? Especially given that I feel like he had a pretty active 4 or 5 years there, sort of the peak of online poker. What's it been like over the last 5 or 6 years? It feels like there's not that much history there.
Sure.
Definitely one of the all-time PLO greats, though. Just no doubts about it.
No doubt. All right, moving on to Bryn Kenney. 57 million in live earnings, an absolutely insane number. Number one all time in live MTTs. Of course, that is largely off the backs of stuff like, the 1 million euro buy-in thing that he won. That was largely an invitational. He has been an extremely good live tournament player in terms of results. He was had amazing results in online tournaments, sort of not so recently, I believe. I would be open to being corrected on that, but I don't really have much else to add for Bryn Kenney. What do you think?
I mean, look, the guy's number one most big money cashes ever. This guy's about big money, puts it all on the line, gambles it up, and guess what? He came out of that with the most money you possibly can. Has a great understanding of the existence of life. That's important when you're playing on the felt. He's played cash games. He's played tournaments. He's played more tournaments. He played mixed games. He battled me in some heads up back in the day. He's been all over the place, gambling it up. And guess what? Even though sometimes maybe he doesn't get in with the best of it, he's improved a lot over the years. He's become a very strong tournament player. And he's number one on the entire list for tournaments. Number one. Maybe he's not so good in these other game types. Maybe he's not a very good cash game player, but number one all-time tournaments has got to be considered for the top 20.
For sure. All right, moving on to Tom Dwan.
We're just going through the list of Doug's best friends right now, aren't we? This is just like...
Yeah, we had a nice... By the way, this was truly an RNG'd list in terms of order, chat, and we got a nice Doug hit list almost here in the middle. We got Tom Dwan, number 26 winner ever on High Stakes TV. This was someone who I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on. I mean, he's Tom Dwan. He's probably, if you're a young poker player, there's a good chance you're playing seriously because of him right now. If you have a quick thought to add, but I really don't think we need
he's just clearly not in the top 20. Look, I mean, he's a famous player. He's played in a lot of high stakes cash games. I know we're not trying to bias the results here too much, but like, what has he really done? He lost some heads up challenges that he didn't finish. And then he, ran up a bankroll playing in some soft games online. No one in the top tier respects his game. He's just not done. He's just not had the results in basically anything for an extended period of time to be justified being the top 20 all time. This isn't a list about who's the most famous or popular. Obviously, he's a very popular player. A lot of players like him. A lot of people identify with him. But the reality of the matter is, like, we're talking about top 20 all-time poker. I just can't see how you're giving that to Tom Dwan.
Yeah, for sure. It's similar to I would argue Robl's better, but it was similar to what we were saying about Robl earlier, where they've really chased the most lucrative path, which just happens to be the path that doesn't really...
Not even remotely similar to Robl. Not even remotely.
I was thinking more in terms of just the fact that they've been focusing more on like the high stakes, soft live games where we don't even know how they're doing. So it's hard to really make arguments for that.
I see you, Mike, and I appreciate you.
All right, moving on to Steve O'Dwyer. 31 million in earnings, number 13 live MTTs. I mean, I know this guy's been a live MTT crusher for a long time. What else do you know about him?
Another one of those tournament players I feel like I don't know that much about. I have him on this list because when you're just getting to the point where you have $31 million in earnings, that just has to be considered number 13 all time on that list. If people know more about Steve, that would be great. I really don't have much information about him. I just know that he is a crusher in these high stakes MTTs and has been for a good number of years.
Word. All right, moving on. Fedor Holes, crown up guy. 33 million in earnings, number 10 live MTTs, one of arguably the sickest MTT runs of all time when he was like 22, 23. He was just mashing everything. And it seemed like
phenomenal online MTT results as well.
Yeah, for sure. Another one of those guys that I don't quite know how much cash he's really gotten in. I think he's really been more of a specialized tournament player. He's gotten in the mix in PLO tournaments and stuff like that. Probably some mixed tournaments too, but he's the place he showed dominance is the Nullum at Hold'em tournament arena. Ton of respect to him for that. I think we can move on quick. Everyone knows Fedor. Moving on to Nicholas. This last name, Azdet, I'm going to guess. That's Lena 900. One of the best, I'm sure some people would argue the best current online tournament player. Phenomenal results, phenomenal player. I'd have to quickly search his live results, but what are your thoughts on Lena?
I was looking at some of his online stuff. It looked like something like 15-ish million in online cashes. I'm just kind of guessing. Again, that's going to be a way lower average buy-in than we see in these live high roller circuits. In terms of cashes in IRL, seems like, assuming this is his Hennigan, it's like 1.3 million. Pretty small potatoes overall. Not that many years of play, but look, like this guy's got tens of millions of dollars online. One of the top ever online MTT players. A lot of people view him as the strongest. Obviously, a very, very good tournament player. Not a lot known about him outside of that. There's no picture on his Hennigan. Again, kind of hard with some of these guys. Like, how much do you penalize people that don't play a lot of live poker, Mike? It's hard to say. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, it's super tough. I mean, again, it goes back to what we were saying at the top. This best word is very subjective, and what we think about it is going to be different from what voters think about it. And the idea here is that we're all sort of combining our efforts on what we all think is the best, and it ends up being sort of crowdsourced to sort of the average, if you will. So it's going to come down person to person. Some people are going to value what Lena's done more than others. That simple. Moving on to Stephen Chidwick, the UK tournament specialist. He's one of those guys that I feel like I was hearing about a little bit here and there for years, and then out of nowhere, he was just considered by basically everyone one of those top guys. Like he was always a top guy, just to be clear, but it was a little bit more in the shadows. And then now he's there's like no one who doesn't think that he's one of the top tournament players and just one of the top no limit players, particularly with ante in the world.
Yeah, he played tournaments for a long time, and then he just kind of came out of left field with, all of a sudden he was just amazing. And I think he was probably one of the first guys to really utilize the use of solvers in their playing tournaments. I haven't asked him that. The way he plays, it seems that way. And applying that to the tournament setting against people that weren't sort of familiar with playing in such a balanced type of way. I think he just came in and really just killed it playing in a lot of these different games. And he's also played a variety of games outside No Limit too. I mean, he won a 25K PLO bracelet in 2019. So not even just a strictly No Limit player playing in some of these other events. So, I mean, 25K PLO is not a small stakes tournament to just be hopping into. He's clearly playing some reasonable size stuff outside of these No Limit tournaments.
For sure. All right, moving on.
Also, number 7, I think we should also emphasize number 7 on the all-time ranking. Very impressive.
Very. So Doug, on our list, we had a duplicate. So I've replaced the person who's next on the list because he's going to appear later as well. So let's talk about Byron Kaverman right now. I just made the last minute decision to sort of sub him in when I noticed there was a duplicate. So Byron Kaverman, 16 million in live tournament earnings, 45th all time. What do you know much about his online exploits?
16 million, right? In live?
16 million.
Okay, I mean, you said that. I don't know that much about Kaverman outside of his tournament, live tournament results. Obviously, I've played with Kaverman. I got deep in a tournament that I think he won back in the day, like a WSP bracelet, where I think I got second or third or something, fourth.
10K 6 max.
That sounds.
Oh yeah, he did beat you heads up. It says that on his Wikipedia page.
I lost a heads up for a bracelet. I lost one.
That's what it says. Maybe Wikipedia is wrong. I don't know.
Damn, I didn't remember getting second in the bracelet.
By the way, for anyone just joining us live, just to catch you up, we're not ranking people right now. Specifically, we're just running through the list of candidates, and there will also be a chance in the public voting to do write-ins. So if you don't hear a name that you think deserves to be on this list, you're going to get the chance to give them some love. All right, so moving on to Corey Aldemir, the most recent WSOP main event winner, 20 million in live earnings, with of course 8 million of that coming in the recent WSOP main. Number 30 all time in live MTTs. He was one of those guys, kind of similar to Martin Jacobson and Dario Sammartino, although he didn't win. One of those guys who was running deep and eventually won the main, who it would be a legitimate pain in the ass to make the final table of the WSOP main and have a player of that caliber make it with you. Just truly a top elite player who's going to give you a lot of trouble. What are your thoughts on Corey?
I think that his case is pretty simple. He's been a great tournament player for a long time, 30 in the all-time money list, won the WSOP main event, pretty clear pros. Cons are going to be the standard tournament specialist, not a lot of success outside of these bigger tournament events. Take away the main event. What does his career look like? Obviously, he'll still be a solid, good tournament player, but would he even be anywhere close to the top 20? Probably no, definitely not. So, yeah.
All right, moving on to a classic name who everyone knows is going to be on this top 100 list. Patrick Antonius. He's the number 2 and the number 8 all-time winner, high stakes DB. 12 million in earnings, number 71 in live MTTs. He's one of those guys that I think you would probably categorize him as more of a sort of older school guy. I mean, he was like one of the young guns among the older school guys, but he did have like really solid staying power for a while there in the pre-solver era, at least, where he was, battling at the highest stakes against, the high stakes younger regs who, were supposedly a little bit more suited to online play. And he mashed. I mean, he's number 2 and number 8 on high stakes DB.
Yeah. I mean, one in all the formats, played on every cash show, played on all the high stakes games for a super long period of time. One of the all-time winners online, still in the top 100 in tournaments, didn't even really play tournaments that much. This guy's an absolute legend, and certainly one of the all-time great. I mean, not trying to just super bias the results here, but absolutely a strong contender to be in the top 20.
For sure.
Not technically as sound, of course, as some of the guys today, but for his era, which is a little bit older now, I think, definitely was a clear top notch player.
Played one of my favorite hands of all time as well with him and Sammy Farha in high stakes poker. It was like Jack 9 versus King Queen on something like 9 high, 2 hearts, and they both turbo get it in. Patrick with like top pair Jack kicker, the other guy Sammy with like 2 overs and a flush draw. Just phenomenal 2009 poker. I love that stuff. All right, moving on. We got another mainly tournament player, Alex Foxen. I believe his screen names are like Big Foxy, stuff like that. I mean, I have some stuff to say about Alex, but what would you say?
I would say that it's definitely a conspiracy that the government has put out these shots, and it's a little convenient that now they want to. Oh, you meant about his poker career?
Poker stuff.
Oh, poker. $20 million in earnings, good for number 31 on the all-time list. I feel like we just saw number 30. Alex is a very good tournament player. Has had great results over the years. I'm not really sure how much he's done outside of tournaments. So again, a little bit in that just tournament player zone. But the other thing is, if you're going to be in the tournament player zone, you really need to be higher on the list. I feel like 20 million, a lot of earnings, don't get me wrong, but if you're in the top, let's say 5 just tournaments, it's easy to make your case as, hey, I play tournaments, but I'm fucking amazing at them. When you're a little bit lower down the list, maybe not so much.
Sure. He is, not to take too much away from him though, because he really is, when it comes to tournaments, he is one of the most feared players, one of the most respected players among the other elites. So moving on to Martin Jacobson, someone who I mentioned a moment ago when we were talking about Corey Aldemir, one of those high roller guys who just ended up going on to win the main, something that's a super impressive accomplishment. I mean, getting through the main, there's so many landmines you have to dodge throughout that 8-day journey, and he did it. Then again, though, how much does one tournament really matter, and how much has he done outside of just like the tournament sphere? I mean, both online and live. I think that's going to be the big question mark for whether or not he deserves to crack the top 20 is just, has he done enough in tournaments, considering that he hasn't done so much outside of them. All right, let's move on quick after that to John Monet. Now, I got to be honest, this is one of those guys that people suggested and just said has to be on there and felt like it was snubbed from your initial list.
So I originally had Benny Glazer on here, and my good mixed game pro friend Jacob Dalit, I'm going to put him on blast right now. He messaged me and said, you simply cannot have Benny on there over John. So I took Benny's spot and gave it to John. So if anyone has a problem with that, you can tweet at JLama. You can let him know what you think about that. I think his exact words were, John, is it pronounced Monet?
I would assume Monet, yeah.
Monet. Very strong mixed game regular. Benny, not so much. I won't use his exact words. I'll keep something secret. Okay, so anyways, this guy, a good mixed game player, tough to play with, good at a variety of games. $3.3 million in earnings. I forget if you said that or not. 4 WSB bracelets. So this would be someone, if you're looking for a player that's maybe a little more well-rounded, good at a lot of different game types, a strong player across the board, you might consider having John Monet in your top 20.
For sure. All right, moving on to one of my favorite inclusions on the list. I love that you did this. Dan Bilzerian. I'm gonna just read you guys verbatim the 3 points from Doug's notes on Dan Bilzerian. Number 1, one more than almost anyone on this entire list. Number 2, has a jet. Number 3, knows Andrew Robl. So 3 really strong points for cracking the top 20 all time. Any closing thoughts on Dan Bilzerian? I think we can move on quickly from
I think we can move on. Next one, Alexander Kostritsin, otherwise known as Joizo, number 12 all-time winner on HSDB. Another guy that was known for winning in a variety of game types, very talented player. One of the most feared online mixed game players of all time. Also has over $3 million in live tournament earnings. Obviously, that's not going to be very high in the list, but it is still something. Primarily playing in a lot of these different mixed games.
And really quickly, I have to interrupt because Llama's in the chat and he said, I did not word that strongly. Benny Glacier is very good. So just shout out to Benny Glacier. He's won a lot of bracelets. He's a great player.
Let me look this up.
No shade needed. Moving on to Benjamin Roll, Ben CB. Maybe that was a different Llama in the chat. I don't know. Moving on to Benjamin Roll, Ben CB. Again, mirroring some of our thoughts from earlier players. This guy has mainly been a tournament player, pretty much exclusively a tournament player in terms of like playing at a super high level. And now that said, compared to some of the other tournament guys, Ben CB hasn't done so much live. I think that's by design. I think he's just not as interested in that life. And, you know, it sucks to hold that against him in this list, but he's been very, very, very specialized at just online tournaments. You know, he's top tier in that arena. You know, a lot of people would argue he's the best, particularly at like the mid to high stakes level, and then also nosebleeds as well. But he especially is one of those guys that actually like is grinding 109s and obviously mashes them because he's a world-class player. But yeah, I mean, any closing thoughts on Ben CB?
Awesome tournament player, great success mid to high stakes online. Definitely someone that knows his game. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna agree with most of the stuff. Mike, it's kind of hard for me to take anyone that has played tournaments online at a high level and has not done so live. It's just kind of hard for me to take those players seriously for a top 20 list, because if you're not going to have played cash and you're going to be like, okay, I'm a tournament player. Okay, you need to show me that you're good at everything in order to make at least my top 20. And I don't feel like that's the case here, despite being an absolutely top-notch online player.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, moving on to someone who has definitely had the online success and then has also translated a bit to live, Cal Anderson. His screen name was like Cal and some numbers. He was one of those very, very intuitive players. Like one of those guys who you'll see a hand played and he somehow shows down like 5-3 off from like middle position or something. Like he's very like, I kind of remember him being, and you know, I could be a little off here, but being one of those like game flow type players, like, oh, I think people are going to play really tight right now, so I'm going to open and make this like extremely loose open. And there's something to be said for stuff like that, where it's almost like he wins. I'm sure part of that is for his, you know, he is good at doing that sort of a thing to an extent, but it's also like he's had amazing success in spite of doing those like fundamentally flawed plays. And, you know, maybe they've helped him, maybe they've hurt him. I don't know, but it's just something to note about him. What are your thoughts on Cal?
So the thing about Cal is he's one of the all-time great Coop players. The guy's got double-digit wins for Scoop titles. I think that's Scoop alone. He's also won W Coop titles too. So the guy is one of the most successful championship online poker series players ever. Also does have some reasonable success playing in live poker, but a bit more of an online guy in that regard. I guess the main reason I'm having him in here is, if you had to ask who are the best guys that play mixed game tournaments online and live, I mean, it's really kind of him and Sean Deeb. Who else are you going to put in that sort of tier? I would have those guys kind of head and shoulders above the rest. So maybe Jason Mercier, but again, he hasn't played that many events in the last number of years. So he's a little bit of more of a selection to kind of round out some of the different types of players that I feel like were maybe a little underrepresented on the list.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, moving on to Eric Seidel. This is one of those, like, really the quintessential example of someone who was an old school guy. I mean, he got second to Johnny Chan in that famous 1980, I believe it was 88 main event. I could be off by a year there. That was shown in rounders. So he was around playing at a high level then. And then he's still playing like 100Ks and like the super high roll. He does play the super high rollable, right? The 300K?
To my knowledge, I
Yeah,
think
I
so.
believe
Yeah.
he does. But the point is, he's still in the mix in the super high rollers, and he's like competing and winning. It's honestly just incredible the staying power he's had in this game throughout. I mean, what, going on 4 decades now? It's amazing.
So many decades, Mike. So many decades of crushing. It's like he's like the Vince Carter. Well, he's actually better than Vince Carter too. He's like Vince Carter's career length, but a better player than Vince. I mean, this guy's incredible. He's always in there winning. He's always hanging with the kids. He's seems to always be improving. He's tough. You can't just shake him off pots. Some older players, I feel like it's kind of easy to just blow them off of spots because they tend to just be more conservative. This guy's an animal. I've seen this guy bust tournaments where he just does stuff that's you're just thinking, wow, I can't believe that guy just did that, because he thinks that you're just too light or you're too weak or your range isn't balanced. He's willing to put it all in basically any spot, and he's just a nice guy about it during and after.
It's always nice to be nice.
You can play the most insane hand with Eric with Seidel, and then afterwards, just be good playing, guys, and then just walk away like it was nothing. Whereas you're like, yeah, fuck you, man. Like you try to do this shit in the turn, like what the fuck was that? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Anyway, certainly, I don't think that there's almost anyone on this list with the longevity.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe one or two other guys, but like longevity stance, I think he's just around top of the list, and I mean, it's impressive, very impressive.
Yeah, for sure.
The short case against would be, definitely tournament specialist. So
yeah, for sure. I just feel like the longevity of his success in tournaments kind of like outweighs that a little bit, but that's just my opinion. Moving on to Kristen Bicknell, Chrissy B. She is, I mean, arguably the best female player of all time. 5.3 million in earnings that's good for 245th in live MTTs. I don't think she's played like a ton of the high rollers as well. There's the super high rollers, so it's not padded by like these insane buy-ins. Though she has played high, of course. She's former Supernova Elite, I believe, playing cash, right? Like she was an actual cash crusher.
I can't confirm that. Someone said she's Supernova Elite. I wish we could get like an easy list of who got it what years. I don't know if that's publicly available or not, but I'm not sure what she played, but I did see someone saying that she was Supernova Elite, which is very impressive. Obviously, Supernova Elite, for people that maybe don't know these days, it was a volume prop on stars. You played enough hands. You earn 1 million VPPs, you would get a certain tier of rewards back from Poker Stars. So it was difficult. I never got it, and I was a grinder.
Yeah, for sure. And then she's also got 3 WSOP bracelets. Just clearly one of the top tournament players today, even. All right, moving on to Sean Deeb. We talked about him a moment ago, comparing him to Cal. He really is just one of the top online tournament players of this whole of like sort of Doug and my generation of players, like people who are between like 30 and 45 years old right now. Like he's just really, really, really good, and was for a long time. Obviously an amazing mixed player. I mean, he plays all the game types, every World Series of Poker. I mean, the guy, it's hard to imagine many people who love the grind more than Sean. I mean, the guy missed the birth of one of his children to play a World Series of Poker tournament. Just honestly, like unbelievable stuff that I would think was made up if I didn't know better.
$9.3 million in live earnings as well, 5 WSOP bracelets. Generally regarded as a strong mixed game cash player as well. So plays a bunch of no limit cash, plays everything. He's at least pretty good at everything. Not as fundamentally sound, not as technically sound. If you play no limit with him, he'll get into an argument with you about playing 6-5 with offsuit on the button. Lord knows how many times I had to have that argument with Deeb. But good in everything, and definitely awesome instincts for the game. He can play well. And also, just one other caveat here. I have not seen anyone else that can 24 table on a laptop so effortlessly, but he can just do it and just kill in all those games at the same time. It's incredible.
Oh, is he still doing that? That's kind of a young man's move. Is he still doing that?
I bet you when he does a trip for an online series, I would imagine he's still doing that shit.
Hell yeah. I would love if you hear this, Sean, please confirm that on Twitter.
Next player, Mike McDonald, otherwise known as Timex, $13 million in live tournament earnings, good for number 57 all time in the live MTT streets. But unfortunately, on the other hand, Mike couldn't beat 2-5 cash. So how serious should we take this guy for the? No, I'm just kidding. Most of this list couldn't beat 2-5 cash. Online, anyway.
Online, yeah.
Online, sorry, online, or maybe live. I know I can't seem to beat it a lot these days.
In one case, yeah.
So I think I feel like Mike just he was a very good tournament player for the years he played. Did he do enough stuff outside of that? I don't really feel like he did. Never really played in the mixed game stuff. Never really played in the PLO stuff. Wasn't a cash reg at the higher stakes. To me, I don't have him in the top 20, but he certainly was an excellent tournament player for the years he did play tournaments.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Moving on to Justin Bonomo, someone who was formerly on the list for number 1 all-time live MTTs. Now he's number 2, 57 million in winnings. It's like just behind Bryn. And he's got 3 WSOP bracelets. I think pretty much everyone knows Justin Bonomo is just an absolute crusher when it comes to no limit hold'em and particularly tournaments, but he's also played cash. What do you know about his sort of other game type experience?
So he played a lot of online cash back in the day. We battled some heads up no limit 10, 12 years ago. It's a long time ago now. I don't think he plays too much cash, to be honest. I've not followed up with Justin in the last few years. But I don't think that he was that much of a cash game player. I think that he was by far and away a tournament player.
Makes sense. By the way, I don't know if you might have seen this, but this is unbelievable to me. I didn't realize. Bryn Kenney's current all-time cashes, 57.2 million. Justin Bonomo's 57.194. Literally behind by $10,000 when they're both at 57 million. That is unbelievable. That's like the kind of thing that there could be a miscount somewhere that like changes it. It's kind of unreal.
Oh, we get some hanging chads involved here.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe Justin Bonomo played some daily at the Palace station that wasn't included. You know. All right.
I will also say, having played with both Bonomo and Bryn, and I've not played much with either in the last few years, obviously, because I haven't been playing much poker. But Bonomo strikes me as a very, very, very fundamentally sound player. Seems extremely balanced, extremely measured, extremely sharp. Knows what he's doing. Not that Bryn does, and obviously they both do, but if I had to guess just their stylistically, I feel like Bryn is a little bit more of the kind of guy that just tries to know what you're up to and take it to you, whereas Bonomo is one of those guys that you're just not going to outwork him on the studying perspective, and he's just going to be too sharp for you. So both styles. We don't have to get into the classic GTO versus exploit argument here, Brady, but 2 different kind of styles that are both in the same neck of the woods.
For sure.
Right there at the top. Cole South, online cash game legend, absolute one of the top online players for many, many years in Ring No Limit, in Heads Up No Limit, in Heads Up PLO. Didn't play too much in the tournament streets, so definitely more of a cash game specialist, but also played a lot of the stuff, I think, in Vegas, at least briefly. I'm sure he played some cash games in the Southern California area as well. I think that the thing for Cole really is, I just think that he was one of the greatest players in the early to mid online era. And then even in the late teens, he was still crushing it in the Heads Up PLO streets. Just always a winner, always winning at a good clip, truly understands the game. Really one of the pioneers of a lot of different poker strategy online. I know I'm a little biased. I just have him on the podcast here, but truly one of the best online cash game players of all time.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, moving on to Ted Forrest, another old school guy, another guy who's played, a lot of mixed games, stuff like that. He's number 9 all time for WSOP bracelets with 6. I believe that's tied for number 9. He's an old school guy. It's hard to know so much about him because a lot of the stuff is sort of pre-tracked. I mean, other than the live tournaments specifically, he was on like high stakes poker and such back in the day. Not a ton though, and I remember him playing pretty tight, though it's hard to say for sure on those edited shows. Any thoughts on Ted Forrest?
Yeah, I mean, the only real argument for Ted Forrest is how much he can value winning WSOP bracelets. So if you asked Phil Hellmuth if he's tied for 9th, he should be tied for 9th on our list. Moving on, Olivier Bousquet. So Olivier's played a lot of different things. Of course, infamous for coming up in the Heads Up Sit and Go streets, was one of the best Heads Up Sit and Go players for many years. Then he also transitioned over to live tournaments. He's cashed for, why did I not write down his number of cashes here? It's randomly, some people I just randomly didn't write this down. Cash for millions of dollars, though, I'm sure $9 million in live MTT earnings, good for 121st all time. Very good player, thinks about the game with a very high level of critical thinking, always trying to improve his game. Good approach to the game, very disciplined, and just a very good player in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I've played a little bit against Olivier Bousquet in the heads up sit and go streets, and he was always really, really tough, especially when you got short. All right, moving on to Doug Polk.
I want the against on this one, okay?
All right, yeah, let's go back to our pro and against argument. So I'll make the case for Doug. He really has been pretty well-rounded in terms of at least no limit hold'em. You know, he's won in live tournaments. He has 3 WSOP bracelets, including one very prestigious one in 100K, and not a super small 100K either, 136 buy-ins. Number 40th winner ever on high stakes DB, was considered the best heads up player for a long time, is arguably currently could be potentially one of the better heads up players, although obviously he's not in the streets. And he's also had success in online tournaments, and he really has not played many of them. It really is amazing how good this guy, to my right, your left looking at the screen, has done at tournaments considering how few of them he's played. But what would be your case against this gentleman, Doug?
Strong case against here, Mike. First off, PLO Fish, down a lot of money in PLO lifetime. Second, online 6-max Fish. In fact, show me a format this guy wasn't a Fish other than heads up no limit, and I guess mixed games versus Luke Schwartz. Live cash game, Fish, down money there too. I mean, okay, cool story. You can full versus for Hummy, but can you win any pots? You look at his bracelets, won a tag team bracelet, didn't even play for. He wasn't even at the table when he won the bracelet. How are we going to give this guy credit for anything? Didn't play over half of the event. Cool story. You won 40% of one bracelet. Your buddy won. Won a 1K turbo. 1,500 people played down to 9 in one day. Jamming 4 big blinds. Great stuff. Gets it in with a suited connector and stacks 3 people. Wow, some skillful stuff there on the second bracelet. And then finally, can't beat small stakes Texas poker. How are we supposed to consider this guy anywhere near the top 20? She shouldn't even be on this list.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong argument. All right, moving on to...
By the way, we RNG'd this, and the next name, I swear to God, is Vanessa Swelps. It's not Vanessa, I can't even pronounce it. Vanessa Selps.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I was looking at our stats. They're actually pretty similar. Okay, so I have 9 million in earnings, 9.5 million in earnings. She has 12. We both have 3 WSB bracelets. Same person? I don't know. Jury's out.
Yeah, could be. I mean, I thought I was seeing double for a second, but I guess not. Vanessa Selps, I mean, just a classic player. That she definitely got in the streets. She was not afraid to make some fundamentally flawed plays, let's call them. Maybe ambitious plays, you prefer to call them. And, you know, she crushed sort of with and in spite of that. It's a weird balancing act. I'm not sure which one it is exactly. But all right, moving on to Chris Jesus Ferguson, 6 WSOP bracelets, another player tied for 9th. Now, this is a guy I don't really think you can make a strong argument is in the top 20. He really he's done well at specifically live large field tournaments and sort of the pre-modern era tournaments, especially some of the modern era, granted, post 2000s. And you know, he is a main event winner as well. But overall, I don't think there's really been anything to speak of in cash. Has played very tight in all of the sort of like live televised games, so you kind of know he's not really a savage or anything.
I think we can move on. Next person, Jeans. Jens Kylo. I'm sorry, Jeans, for what I just did to your last name. One of the all-time great online PLO players, definitely in that top 3-5 PLO players online ever. He played more 6-max, I think, than the heads-up variants, but was just the absolute best there. Right up there with Ben with Tolerine for win rate. I think when most people talked about Jeans, they viewed him as the toughest player to play in their games for many, many, many years. So just an all-time PLO great. I don't think that he's done too much outside of PLO, though, from what I was looking up online. Maybe you know otherwise, though.
I mean, he definitely played some no limit, but PLO was... I mean, I think it's very similar to Ben Tolerine, where it's basically, when you're talking about his elite accomplishments, it's all going to be in PLO. All right, moving on to Phil Hellmuth, number 1 all-time in WSOP bracelets with 27 million in live earnings. That's good for number 18. We don't have to spend much time on Phil. Everyone knows him. Everyone is familiar with the arguments for and against, because people are pretty regularly talking about if Phil Hellmuth is the greatest player of all time, including himself. And I think one strong argument that I want to make really quick, that isn't a commonly made one, is the fact that he really hasn't played so many high rollers, and you could argue that it's because he knows he's going to get beat down in them, perhaps. It's hard to say for sure. But he hasn't played so many high rollers, and he's still number 18 all-time, 27 million in earnings. Pretty impressive stuff. I mean, it's insanely impressive. Like what he's been able to do in large field tournaments against a lot of recreational players. I mean, I would take Phil over myself and pretty much any any player in those sorts of situations.
I will also say this about Phil. He seems to have an uncanny ability to beat people in heads-up sit-and-goes. Should be noted as well. Next guy up, Timothy Adams, otherwise known as Timothy on PokerStars. This guy went through a little bit of a evolution as a player in No Limit Hold'em. I think about 10 years ago, he was playing some of the high-stakes lineups and was viewed as one of the weaker regulars. Seemed to kind of take a little bit of time away from the game and came back and was a much stronger player, winning in a lot of these lineups, playing a lot of live tournaments as well. I think, right, thorough research here on my part. $25 million in live tournament earnings. I didn't even realize it was that high. Good for 20th on the all-time money list. So crushed online, crushed live, tournaments, cash games. Good at both forms of No Limit Hold'em. I would imagine he's got some at least reasonable online tournament results as well. A very strong No Limit Hold'em player who managed to. Maybe I'm incorrect in thinking that he kind of turned it around like that, but I seem to remember playing with him some and feeling like he wasn't that great, and then it just seemed like one year he just flipped the switch and he was a great No Limit Hold'em player.
I never played with him, but I kind of remember the same where he kind of came out of nowhere and was out of nowhere considered one of the best tournament players in the world and was always in the mix in the toughest ones. All right, moving on to Matt Ashton. This is a mixed game player I don't know too much about. Do you have much to talk about here?
Yeah, Matt Ashton played a lot online. He did very well there. Was a very good player. He also played in a variety of WSB events and live cash in Vegas. I'm sure we should have had Jake on here, and just whenever a mixed game player comes on, he just comes full screen and tells you about the mixed game player, because he would definitely have better breakdowns than we would. I think he also won the 50K Players Championship one. Yeah, he did 50K Players Championship in 2013. Hasn't played much poker in the last 4 or 5 years, it looks like, but definitely a top tier mixed game regular in both cash games and tournaments.
For sure. All right, moving on to Nick Schulman. This was the best commentators list. I think he's clearly cracking the top 3, if not number 1. High stakes player, has been in the mix. I think there was an HBO special made about him. Did you know that? Kind of just random.
No. HBO special?
Yeah, because
about Nick Schulman?
It might not have been HBO, but I remember my friend from high school knowing who Nick Schulman was because they made a poker player sort of documentary about him. We'll have to find it after, or if someone in chat knows, that'd be great if you could let us know. But when it comes to Nick's poker skill, I mean, he's another guy that's not only is he playing mixed games at a super high level, he's also in the mix at some of the highest stakes, no limit games, short deck games, etc. So he does play big bet as well. He's extremely well-rounded, extremely successful. MTV is what chat is saying. Is MTV.
Another one of those guys that the real disservice is going to be the fact that he's played in games that we can't really see. I mean, if we got to see the lifetime career of Schulman in graph form and some hands from Bobby's Room and whatnot, because the guy was just a regular in the Bobby's Room streets, I'm sure that we would be able to put him a little higher on the list. It's just one of those things where we can only work with the information that's publicly available, and that's just the reality. We don't have a lot for Nick.
For sure. All right, moving on to Dominic Niche, phenomenal tournament player who's, I think of him a lot as one of those players who not only has shown the ability to crush high stakes, he's also grinded the more modest stakes, and not low by any means, but and smashed those as well. In more recent years, he's obviously been a bit of a businessman with DTO Poker, and also mainly playing high stakes tournaments when he does play. What else do you know about Dom's sort of recent accomplishments?
I wouldn't say I know much about his recent accomplishments, but I can just say, having known Dominique all these years, he's just a very sharp player. He's good at picking things up, and he's just a tough guy to have in your games. He's played some of the shorter stack cash game stuff too, I believe. Done well online, done well live, done well in tournaments, basically everywhere. Just a very good player at a variety of stack depths, particularly the shorter ones. And guys, today's podcast, which should have been announced an hour and 15 minutes ago, was brought to you by CoinFlex. CoinFlex is a crypto futures exchange which sees over $2 billion in daily trading volume. What the team has built on top of this powerful futures trading engine is a suite of innovative crypto yield products. To celebrate the launch of CoinFlex.us, we are giving away $100,000 in Flex USD. Head on over now to www.coinflex.us to learn more. What is Flex USD? Flex USD is a revolutionary stablecoin invented by CoinFlex that's fully backed, independently verified, and pays interest every 8 hours. Flex USD has a market cap of $350 million and over 23,000 active holders, and has paid out over $22 million in interest to holders in the last year, with an average interest rate between 5 and 17%. You can learn more now at flexusd.com. Legal disclaimer: none of the information contained here constitutes an offer to buy or sell any currency, product, or financial instrument, to make any investment, or to participate in any particular trading strategy. This was just a really great job for me, chat. I forgot to do the mid-roll an hour and 40 minutes late, actually, and I realized that Brady had been messaging me privately. Doug, we're supposed to do the mid-roll, and I had forgotten about that. And then when I pulled it up, I read the wrong ad. And so I had the transition ads, and then I realized that our mid-roll, it still shows the bottom on the screen. So you can see there's a little gap here at the bottom. This was just really A-plus stuff. I want to just say thank you to CoinFlex for, believing in this podcast and our high attention to detail around here.
Oh, no doubt. But to be fair, they did send us that image.
Oh, that was their fault? Okay, well, I think I did.
Take that, CoinFlex. All right, moving on to Daniel Negreanu, Kid Poker, 46 million in earnings, number 3 in live MTTs, 6 WSOP bracelets, tied for number 9 all time in that category. He's kind of, in a way, similar to me to Seidel in terms of just his staying power across the decades. I mean, it's not quite the same. I think Negreanu got started in more like the mid 90s. Seidel was before that. But Daniel Negreanu is competing at an extremely high level these days. He has also had a lot of success in other game types, not just No Limit. You obviously know Daniel very well. What do you think?
I think that the big difference there between him and Seidel is that he has tried to challenge himself in a lot more ways. Of course, playing in cash games, mixed games, playing against me in the challenge that we did. He's just played a very wide variety of things and not specialized so much so in one format. Of course, tournaments have been his main format, but I think you got to give a little bit of value there. Also, a bit more of a staple in a lot of the higher stakes cash game shows that have happened over the years. So I think it's a little more well-rounded than Seidel and a little bit better long-term tournament results than Seidel. So, I again don't want to bias the results too much here, but absolutely a top candidate for the top 20 list.
For sure. All right, moving on to Scotty Wynn, the Prince of Poker. We don't have his tournament results up, but they're very impressive. I assume we can pull them up very quickly. Let's see here, because we do have access to the internet.
Yeah, he has over $12 million in live tournament winnings. I think he has 6 or 7 bracelets as well.
Yep, including the Poker Players Championship, the 50K.
And probably was doing that while inebriated. That's got to be worth something, Mike.
Yeah, it really does. All right, I think we can move on quick. Hack Dang. Hack Dang, aka Trex Online. He's the number 7 and the number 30 winner on High Stakes DB. Doug, you played very much in Hack's era. So what would you say about him?
Well, I really did, and I struggled with the Dang brothers about whether they should enter this list or not, because if you want to make the argument about sort of their role in poker history and how good they were at the peak, they were 2 of the absolute top guys in high stakes poker games. They're both on the all-time winner list for High Stakes CB, crushed basically all of the game types they played, both Hack and Zidang. But then they didn't really do that much afterwards. So it's kind of tough to really rate these guys. They're sort of peak versus longevity. This is like maybe the best example of that. And by the way, Hack Dang was actually before my time, Brady. I know you think that I'm old, but they actually came before me. Believe it or not, there was a before me time.
You were at least, though, playing like at the lower stakes at that point, right? So you were at least looking up to him, no?
Not really. I think not really too much.
All right, my timeline's a little off. My mistake. Moving on to Linus Lozinger, Linus Love. I mean, anyone who basically follows online poker knows that Linus is one of the most respected cash game players there is. He has played both No Limit Hold'em and PLO at a very high level, heads up and 6-max. It's more 6-max though, right? He's played a lot of both, but I think he's more well known for 6-max, but he's definitely played a lot of heads up as well. He's also played a chunk of PLO. He's also played a chunk of live tournaments. Not too much of a sample there, but he does have somewhat of a record. He's cashed for almost $2 million playing live tournaments. Not too much, but something. He's not played that many. He only has 10, 15 cash or something like that. So the thing about Linus, the real argument for Linus is if we just wanted to go, if this list was who actually, regardless of time period, regardless of game type, who is the best No Limit Hold'em player, it's very likely it's Linus. There's a couple other people on this list that would be sort of right around that level, but
absolute top crusher in the absolute hardest games in the world in no limit hold'ems. The argument for Linus is actually pretty simple. It's this guy is probably the best player to ever have played no limit hold'em. He needs to be in the top 20. So, and that's a strong argument. It's the most common game. It's the most popular game. He played against the toughest people. But then was he outside of that? Not that much. Tough one.
Yeah, for sure. All right, it's kind of interesting how this RNG did this, where we have these like clumps of people that are.
I feel like the back half of our list was much stronger than the front half.
I definitely agree. So now we got Makita Bajikowski, Fish 2013, 31 million in live earnings, number 12 ever in live MTTs, and he started online. I mean, he was an absolute masher.
I mean, one of the all-time winners in online poker history. You can't see all of the results on the HSDB; it's archived and stuff. But won many millions of dollars playing online poker as well over many years. Is one of the absolute best 6max players. Has also played some heads up, and then he transitioned over to playing live tournaments, won $31 million there, number 12 ever, and he transitioned to that kind of late. Like he played many years of just playing online, and then as a later move in his career, move over to live earnings. He's number 12 ever.
Yeah.
Again, probably not quite as absolute top notch as Linus, but around that most likely. Very sharp, very balanced, very good player, and immediately translated to tournament success. And you know what? A lot of the cash game guys, and I'm super biased here, but when the cash game guys are at a top level and they start playing tournaments, you just know it's a countdown till when they just are absolutely crushing it every time.
Yeah, as long as they stick with it, yeah, more than likely.
Any top of the world cash game player online, they play tournaments, they're going to be a good player and they will eventually crush those games, unless they have terrible live tell stuff, which is always possible. Definitely. And yeah, I didn't realize this, but the next guy on this list is Jonas Moles, otherwise known as OTB Red Baron. This RNG, man, I might need to get a different RNG out here.
It's like when you shuffle a fresh deck and then you end up with like the 9, 8, 7 of spades, like all next to each other. Like, wait a second.
So Jonas Moles, otherwise known as OTB Red Baron, he is the number 25 winner ever on HSDB. Again, HSDB started to be not a great source of tracking around the time that he was coming up. Went from playing in 2-5 Zoom games to the absolute toughest games in the world online, beating absolutely everyone. He was the golden standard of online players for years. All the online players trying to download his hands and copy him and see what he's doing. He was essentially setting the trends. He was the top guy for many years of online poker. And to be the top guy for that long in such a competitive game type is incredibly impressive. And he managed to do it for years, for absolute years. He was the number one guy in online poker. Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of live tournament cashes and winnings. And I imagine he's not played too many tournaments either. He's played almost no tournaments in his career, but if we're strictly going by top players ever, this guy is definitely in the top 20 for players and is an icon for the online cash game streets.
For sure. And for anyone who has not seen his thread on 2+2, his poker goals and challenges thread, he basically posted like, I'm going to start taking poker seriously when he was playing like 50 NL. And then if you read through the thread, you get to follow his journey to playing like the highest stakes. So if you haven't checked that out on 2+2 poker goals and challenges forum, definitely check that out. It's a great read. Moving on.
One thing really quick here, not to make this take longer for us, but really quick here. Some people are saying, oh, you can't be top 20 just for being really good at online. That's why you get to vote, guys. If you think that it's more impressive to be the number one player in online poker cash games for a few years, that's more impressive than winning a bunch of tournaments. You get to vote that. If you think that it's not, you get to vote that. If you think you need online and live, you get to vote that. If you think online doesn't matter, you get to vote that. You get to vote. So we're just trying to prepare the case for these people to the best of our ability, and you guys at home get to decide.
Yeah, exactly. Doug and I are going to be biased because we are human beings. Moving on to Johnny Moss, 9 WSOP bracelets, tied for number 5 overall. Earlier when we were talking about Billy Baxter, and I was kind of saying like there are just people who are clearly, no disrespect to Billy Baxter.
I knew you were talking about Johnny Moss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Johnny Moss and Doyle, right? Like people like that. Like it's just there was no real, publicity around poker, not much back when Johnny Moss was playing, and like still everyone knows who he is. Everyone knows he's a legend. It's just hard it's easy to see the argument for why he belongs in the top 20 just with the level of icon that he is in the game.
So I think if you're going to give someone top 20 outside of Doyle from the oldest generation of poker players here, I just feel like it has to be Johnny Moss. He's got 9 WSOP bracelets. He was an absolute icon of the game. He was consistent over many decades of play. Very long career of winning money playing poker. And simply just if you just look at the stats, it's just better than the people around him in that same era. So we can't know too much about these guys, and maybe we would need to get someone that was around in those days to come on and explain some of the things about these players. But if you're going to try and give the nod to some of the older players, I personally would put Johnny Moss ahead of a lot of the other players in that time period.
Yeah, I agree. All right, moving on to Dan Coleman, one of the greatest heads-up sit-and-go players of all time. 29 million in live earnings. That's 14 all time. Of course, that is largely driven by winning a $1 million tournament for, I don't know how much it was, maybe 12, 14 million, something like that. He also very notably just fell off the map after winning that tournament. Just decided, nah, I don't need to look at cards anymore, which mad respect.
Kind of controversial too. He said, gambling's not good for you or something like that. It wasn't that exact quote, but like, people shouldn't gamble or something like that, and then dropped out. It was not an interesting way to go out. I mean, he's played a little bit of poker since then. I think the man loves himself a chance to score big for sure. I think he's doing some more cryptocurrency stuff nowadays. Not entirely sure, but yeah, definitely a all-time notable tournament player.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to Victor Blom, Isildur 1, absolute online poker legend. I mean, there was no more fun time for me, at least in the poker world, than when I was like a low stakes, mid stakes player, and those games were going on between Victor Blom and Tom Dwan and all that. Like, I remember following that stuff, and it was just so entertaining, seeing those big numbers being put up every single day. The guy is perhaps the most fearless player of all time, arguably to a fault, considering he 8-tabled versus two really, really incredible intuitive players. He was, I believe, 4-tabling Phil Ivey and then 4-tabling Patrick Antonius at the same time.
It was something like that. Yeah,
it was not a wise move, I would argue, but it does show a pretty incredible amount of moxie. And he did put up some amazing results for a long time.
I also want to say this about Isildur because, look, the guy definitely lost a lot playing in the high stakes games online. No doubt about it. He was fueled by full tilt money and loans from different people. And, if we look at his lifetime cash online, it's probably losing. But I'm going to go a different direction on that and say it's actually incredibly impressive that he managed to do as well as he did, because he would play the best player in every game type. He'd play the best triple draw player, then he'd play the best 08 player, then he would play the best no limit player, then he would play the best PLO player, and he would go on big winning stretches and he would hold his own. And there were times where he'd win for months. There were times he would just beat the best players. Do you know how many people could jump from game type to game type like that and have any chance of having any kind of record of winning? None. Right. No one. Yeah, he managed to do that. So the guy's obviously a bit of a degenerate, and he certainly had terrible game selection, but definitely had moxie, Brady. And in my eyes, I actually think he's one of the best heads-up mixed game players or heads-up players of all time, just given how many different games that he played, despite ending up down in the sum of them.
Right. Yeah. Super crazy stuff. All right. Moving on to Phil Galfond, number 6 winner ever on high stakes DB, 3 WSOP bracelets. Obviously has been successful in a multitude of game types, in particular the big bet games, though. He's an amazing PLO player and had a lot of success in no limit, particularly in like sort of the pre-solver era. Not to say he's a slouch nowadays, but that was more when he was in the no limit streets. What do you got to say about Phil?
Also won a bunch of heads up challenges in his matches versus different people in heads up PLO. He's beaten basically every person, including some epic ones where it got down to almost no blinds left. Or sorry, being down like 45 blinds, coming all the way back to win some of these matches. The only thing I would say that you could kind of detriment to Galfond is maybe like his no limit isn't quite where it should be. He's not had a lot of tournament results, only $3 million in cashes, but just what he's done in PLO and in maybe some mixed games just in general, certainly an all-time great player. Also, no Mike, doubt. Did we mention my heads up challenges when we did me? I forget. Did we mention those?
We did not, actually.
Oh, that was on you, man. You were doing the pro case. I was getting ready.
I was just so focused on what you were going to say on the con. Done one heads up challenges, guys, in case you haven't heard. Including get someone who's coming up on the list. Who's very good. Moving on to Daniel Jungleman Cates, number 3 winner ever on high stakes DB. He's got great live tournament results as well, including just winning the 50K Poker Players Championship, which, we've talked about a few times as one of the most prestigious and impressive tournaments to win. It's a mixed game tournament with a bunch of different games. He's an amazing intuitive player, absolute animal. Some of the hands I've seen him play against Doug, in fact, are just insane.
I've lost more buy-ins to jungle in my life than any opponent I've ever played in heads up in my entire life.
Yeah, and some of the hands, some of the like queen high calls and crazy stuff that he does.
That one was brutal.
Yeah. He had, just to give you guys the quick version, jungle hero called Doug on the river with queen high missed flush draw, so he like blocked Doug's bluffs, and Doug just had a lower flush draw, just like absolute.
It was the board was like Jack 7 3 deuce king, and I tripled off, and he called me down with queen 8 in no limit.
Incredible, and with the missed flush draw too. Like
missed flush draw.
Amazing.
It was something
amazing. I mean, yeah, I think jungle is like a really strong case.
The thing is, Jungle has played all kinds of games. He's played no limit. He's played PLO. He's played live. He's played online. He's played mixed games. He won the 50K this year. Obviously more of a cash game player. He is a formidable opponent. He's tough in any game that he plays. He tries to fight to win pots. He knows he's got to try and get out there and win pots. I think the general, at least historically, knock on him was he's just a very bad live poker player. He's kind of got some tells and the way that he he's more of an online guy. But at the same time, he's kind of overcome that now too with the results that he's had. I mean, this guy is another long-running, phenomenal player in many formats of the game.
For sure.
Also, a real natural talent compared to some of these other guys.
Definitely. I mean, he was playing like an absolute savage long before we had tools to prove that was the right way to play. All right, Sammy Kelopura. I got to be honest, man. I have not heard of this person.
This is Lars Luzak. So this is one of the all-time heads-up PLO battlers. Interesting career for him because back in the day, start of online poker, especially PLO streets, he was one of the top players. And then he became kind of, in my opinion, a bit of a fish at the high stakes where people viewed him as sort of a spot you want to try and get in your games or play him heads up. And then he kind of rallied back to being a fairly sharp player by the end. So he had a bit of an interesting career in that there were points where I think he was just absolute top notch and points where he was definitely one of the weaker spots in the higher stakes regs. I view him a little bit worse though than the Galfons or the Tollerines. Maybe, or probably it's tough to put with some of these people. I mean, he's definitely on the all-time online money list for winnings in PLO, no doubt about it. So certainly a great PLO player. Maybe some of this stuff is kind of personal preference on stylistically the way that they played. And maybe I'm just being biased by the fact I remember playing him heads up and he had like 80% fold the delay C-bet. And I was just like, this guy's a fish. So maybe that's just clouding my judgment here on how good he is. He also does play a bunch of no limit tournaments, I think, too, which could maybe kind of round out his ability as well.
Cool. All right, moving on to really well-rounded player, Paul Volpe, Paul G's. 3 World Series of Poker bracelets, super, super talented mixed game player. He kind of gives me a little bit of a Sean D vibe, not quite the same level of like, just in certain ways. I see the faces you're making to the audio viewers. Doug is making some faces at me right now. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely performed at an extremely high level in No Limit, but more so, he's just been a super top mixed game player. What do you guys say about Paul?
Super well-rounded. I like the way that you put that. He's played a lot of the same types of games as Deeb, and he plays in all the East Coast games, so they're in a lot of the similar sort of streets, I think. He's done great at the World Series of Poker, won several bracelets, plays a lot of cash, plays a lot of tournaments. Yeah, just very well-rounded, good, solid player. You play with Volpe, you know that he's going to be pretty balanced in his approach, and he's not easy to play against. So, I want to quickly mention something in the chat here. Someone's talking about Kumikon. I thought about putting him in, but I just feel like only having ever played heads up PLO, even if you're one of the best ever at it, I just feel like it's not a wide enough net or wide enough talent pool to where I just feel like it's just not enough. Like what if I did that for No Limit? What if I put someone that was only ever a heads up No Limit player, right? Like me. But if I was like, oh, heads up No Limit guys, just that's my I don't know, what would it be? Like my resume is just heads up No Limit. It wouldn't be enough. Well, heads up PLO is even worse than that. So definitely one of, if not the all-time greatest heads up PLO player, but not a big enough resume to end up on this list. Great player.
There is that write-in spot, people. So if you think we really snub someone, you're gonna get a chance to write in when the voting opens right after this podcast. All right, moving on to Christoph Vogelsang. His screen name was a bunch of numbers, which always threw me off. But 26.
Tight man on
Right. That's a little easy to remember. But 26 million in live earnings. That's good for number 19. and he's the number 29 winner on high stakes TB and high stakes cash games of all time. What do you got to say about Christoph?
I put him on my list originally for this, and then I took him off. And then as I was doing my research and going through all of the different rankings, I was like, holy shit, this guy's really high on a lot of lists. And I put him back on. So I didn't realize how high he'd snuck on some of these lists. 26 million in tournament earnings. The guy's not played a lot of tournaments, although he does play mainly high rollers, so it's going to impact it. Number 19 in live tournament earnings. Then also number 29 on high stakes DB. And then he's also won a lot of other sites that we haven't seen online. Played a lot of heads up, no limit. Played a lot of ring, no limit. Played a lot of online. Played a lot of live. Very good player. Very good win rate. Very solid approach to the game over many years. Just a very, very good no limit, well-rounded no limit player, but didn't really step outside of that, right? So if you think like online, live, tournaments, cash, whatever, no limit, that's not enough. It's not going to be your guy. I don't think he's played much outside of those events.
Yeah, for sure. All right,
also, he was a little bit of a tight man. and if you don't like scarves, probably not your guy.
Indeed. All right, moving on to Doyle Brunson, the godfather of Polk. 10 WSOP bracelets, tied for number 2 all time. Has arguably had, it's definitely arguable, the most staying power in the game. I mean, he was around in like the 60s, and he was still playing in like the early 2010s. I mean, he played the main this past year, but you could definitely argue he's not really an active player these days. But I mean, there was a good 50 years where he was one of the most well-known and respected poker players on the felt. I think it's pretty easy to know why he's included on this top 100 list here.
Definitely a pioneer of poker, one of the best players from that generation. I mean, there's been some kind of suspect stuff that happened a few years back in Bobby's room with him. But putting that to the side, been a regular in a lot of the highest stakes cash games, 10 WSOP bracelets, one of the absolute pioneers of poker. Definitely a strong candidate for the top 20.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving on to Mike Mizrachi, the grinder. 5 WSOP bracelets, tied for number 17 all time in that regard. He's another guy who's won the Poker Players Championship and has had success in, high stakes, mixed games, stuff like that. Stuff that's kind of behind closed doors. We don't know exactly how well he's done, but presumably well. That would be my presumption. And he's done well in no limit as well. Definitely not the most fundamentally sound player out there. I
just want to tell a personal story here real quick, Mike. So when I played against Michael Mizrachi, which happened one time, it is the exact opposite of Eric Seidel. Remember how I told you with Eric Seidel, like you play a hand, it's like it's insanely aggressive, and afterwards he's super nice about it. When you play against Michael Mizrachi in a big pot, you're thinking, I think this guy wants to punch me in the fucking face right now. Then the hand ends and the tension remains. You're like, oh my God, like this guy. I played some hand and I just triple barreled off some bluff and he called me down with nothing. You think I would have learned my lesson in those spots at some point in my career. And he just like kind of stared at me afterwards, just getting the pot, like, yeah, punk, kind of like, just one of those, like, let him know what's up, let him know what's good. Amazing. And like, I'm just like, I can feel the tension here.
Right. There's got to be something to be said for that.
Also, who gets into trouble for taxes? And then I believe the quote was he didn't know he had to pay taxes. There was no way to know. And then he goes to Vegas that summer and wins the 50K Players Championship. Just perfectly right, sets it up.
Which, by the way, I should have mentioned earlier, he's actually won that 3 times, which is insane. Truly insane. I mean, insane.
I'd put him in the category of enigmas. Like, if there's a few players that are enigmas of poker, like, how can this guy, who's obviously not technically sound, who's obviously, like, on paper shouldn't be a great poker player, but then he wins the 50K 3 times? How is that possible?
Dude, some people have an amazing intuition and then also run a little bit good as well. You got to run good to win any tournament. But
only answer is
it's truly incredible.
Only response that was legitimate there, Mike, was enigma. That was it. I was only looking for one word, but thank you. Okay, we can move on.
Moving on to Sam Boosden, aka European, with some Euro symbols that always kind of light up the table. One of the nicer avatars on the screen with the way his screen name looks. Absolute crusher in online tournaments in particular. What else do you know about him? I don't know too much about what he's done in cash and stuff like that.
So European, my understanding is he's just specifically online tournaments. He's pretty regularly mentioned as the top of the class in today's game in terms of lifetime winnings. I just realized we didn't put Chris Moorman on the list. Did we forget to put on Chris Moorman? I think we did. We should have added him in.
Well, we can add him.
Can we add Chris Moorman as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
We definitely should. We added European and we added London 900, but we also needed to add in Chris Norman.
Okay, let's do Chris Norman next.
Sure, that's fine. So as far as European goes, my understanding is all-time online crusher. I'm sure someone can post graphs somewhere of the results. Someone sent me a link to Lee 900, but they did send one for European. I'd love to see his results across sites too, but definitely one of the top-notch online MTT cash game guys. Does he have much in terms of live caches, though? I've not looked at that.
No, he has like 244K. Hasn't played much.
It's so tough for me, Mike. It's so tough for me to put these online tournament crusher guys at the top when it's if you were just a tournament player and you're winning in both, I can do it. But Chris Moorman has over $6 million in live tournaments, so he's at least done some stuff in the live felt, you know.
Yeah, but European Sam boosting not quite as much in the live arena for sure. By the way, guys, some people are asking for the list. We only have about 12 more people to get through. Then we're gonna reveal the link so you can go look at the list and vote. So just stay patient. You're about to have your chance to look over the list and make your voice heard on everyone. Moving on to Chris Moorman, the guy Doug just talked about. Obviously an online crusher, but he, unlike the last guy we were talking about, he has made that transition alive and has had a ton of success. I know he has at least one WPT title. I'm off the top of my head, I'm not super familiar with his specific accomplishments. You can look it up on Head and Mob easily. You got something?
I'm seeing something, and I'm seeing something very interesting here, Mike. So Lena 900 all-time caches is the highest, it looks like. This is according to Pocket 5, so I don't know how legitimate that is. Lars Luzak is number 2.
For all-time
tournaments? He's like one of the all-time PLO cash game guys, and then number 2 all-time earnings in cash games.
Okay, so that was Sammy Kelopuro, who we talked about a few people back. Lars Luzak. So that's one that, you know, deserves a little bit more respect than a lot more respect perhaps than we gave him earlier. That's
a lot of caches. Number 2 all-time online caches. That's actually very, very, very impressive. Ape Styles number 3 with 20-ish million. I consider putting him on the list. Jonathan Van Fleet, I think his name.
Right. Ape Styles, yeah. And
great player, but again, no live tournament earnings to speak of. But maybe that's enough. Maybe if you think 23 million or 20 million, or for Chris Moorman 19 million online earnings, if you think that's enough to just put you in the realm of the top 20 of all players of all time, so be it. It's up to own personal opinion. But B Paris number 14, by the way, in that list too, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, so talking about Chris Moorman, 6 million live tournament earnings, 19 million online. Yeah, well, a little more well-rounded of a tournament player. And I think for a long time, he was number 1 online caches. It wouldn't surprise me if it's kind of dropped off over the last few years because he's been playing less volume or something. In terms of number of caches, though, he has a lot more caches than Lena or Lars Luzak does. So,
for sure. All right, moving on to Ilari Sahamies, aka Zygmunt. Legend, absolute legend. He was largely a PLO player, super splashy. I remember watching some amazing games between him and Durr where they were playing mandatory pot open, mandatory pot 3-bet.
I remember that. Oh yeah, that was a good
and it was already 501k, so every hand was mandatory 3k, 9k, and then it was on the button. Just incredible the gamble those guys had back then. Yeah, he really was kind of a. I hate to be reductionist about this guy because he definitely dabbled in other things, but his main thing was definitely PLO online cash. He did not play even much no limit successfully. He hasn't really played live tournaments at all. Doesn't really seem like his kind of scene, I would say. What else do you got to say about Ilari?
We've been reductionists for 2.5 hours. I don't know why we would stop now. Certainly PLO focused, and I think he's a little bit in the enigma territory as well. Certainly fundamentally not as strong as all the other PLO players from the people that I've talked to, but tough. Understood spots well, understood when he needed to make moves or value bet or what he needed to do to get things done. But not nearly as technically as sound as some of these other guys, but definitely more of a legend, and he made a lot of money in online poker. So I feel like my bias is just showing here that I clearly prefer some of the other PLO players, but definitely a top PLO player over the years who played for a lot of money and was successful online.
He was also on, I think he's Finnish Survivor, and it was pretty phenomenal. That. Yeah, he purposefully acted like he was the dumbest person of all time. Like he everything in his public interactions with the other Survivor players was like acting like he's an idiot, and then in his confessionals he's like explaining it. Pretty funny. Moving
That's
on
awesome.
to Anthony Zinno, mostly known for his live tournament exploits, 4 WSOP bracelets, plays in high stakes tournaments. What do you got to say about Zinno?
$11 million in career earnings, 4 WSP bracelets, plays a wide variety of events, a lot of the mixed game formats and Potluck Omaha formats, played in the 25K heads up in Cabo last year, plays in a lot of heads up formats as well. I guess when I think about Anthony, I always thought it was Zeno. Is it Zeno? I've always said Zeno. Whatever,
Sure,
doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I've always felt like he's just a pretty well-rounded tournament player, plays a lot of different formats of tournaments, and I don't think he's the kind of guy that's super sharp in any, at least in the no limit ones. I think a lot of the no limit regs and the higher lowers felt like he was a little bit weaker than some of the other guys. He's willing to play all different types of tournaments and has had a lot of success there. He's also had a lot of success in the WPTs. I think he's won several WPTs, one of like the all-time winners for WPT events. So, he's had success across the board in a variety of tournaments and has been reasonably good at all of them.
For sure. All right, moving on to Dmitry Yazkovich. Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident about that one. For Haley.
Yeah, and this one might have been again, just I'm being biased by putting him in here, but For Haley is an all-time legend of the online 6max streets. Many, many years battling it out. I remember playing with him in Fish 2013 over and over and over again at 6max tables. Won millions of dollars. I think he posted his graph in the Russian forums somewhere where he talked about his career playing poker. At first, he was a very exploitative player, got better over the years, but won a lot of money playing poker over a very long period of time, and is just he's just a legend of the online poker game.
For sure. All right, moving on to...
Did he play any tournaments, live tournaments? I feel like he didn't actually transition over that.
I don't think he's played basically any. And if he did, it's like under a different name because I don't think he has like a Hendon mob.
Okay.
All right, moving on to Timofey Kutsanov. God dang it. Kuznetsov. Sorry, guys. My Russian pronunciation, not great. But that's better known as True Teller. Now, this is one that I was actually excited to talk about. True Teller is legitimately the most well-rounded player I know of in terms of big bet games. He mainly started, from my knowledge, at sort of cap short stack games, like 20 big blind, 40 big blind games on different sites. I remember Doug even playing him at some like 200, 400 on iPoker years ago. Or at least we suspected it was True Teller. And then he's also played some like 100 BB cash and has had success in that. He's also crushed live tournaments. He's also played a lot of high stakes live cash. Overall, he's just in the mix when it comes to big bet games, and he does really well at all of them.
He doesn't really play tournaments. I know he has $9 million in earnings, but he's cashed in like 10 tournaments or something. So he's played almost none of these things. I wouldn't say he's much of a tournament player at all, although he's done well in his brief stint playing them. The thing about True Teller is the guy is just incredibly, incredibly smart, and he's so good at playing different game types. He played great in cap back in the day before solutions were readily available. And then he started playing in deep stack anti games. I remember him coming over and I thought, oh, great, a cap play. This guy's gonna be a nit. And this guy was just like ripping it in all over the place. I'm like, dude, you have 300 blinds. Chill the fuck out. Just fearless, smart, good at basically all the games he's played. Plays a bunch of mixed games. He played a bunch of high six mix versus Ivy where they cross booked. He's played a lot of short deck. He's played in Macau. He's played in Vegas. I'm sure he's played in any big spot for poker around the world. I personally view him as one of the best players of sort of like the my-ish generation. I think he actually was playing a little bit maybe even before me, despite being younger. Regardless, he's just an absolute boss in all these game types. An extremely great player.
For sure. All right, moving on to another great player, Ben Solsky, Sauce123, one of the players that Doug beat in a heads-up challenge back in like 2013, I believe. I didn't give the shout out earlier to heads up challenges, so I got to do it twice now. So he is the number 11 winner all time on high stakes database. He's also been very, very successful at Pot Limit Omaha and mixed games as well, I believe. I just kind of vaguely remember hearing about him playing and being successful at mixed games. I obviously Sauce really well. What do you got to say about him?
I think that a lot of people, if you played poker online 10, 15 years ago, you would view Sauce as one of the best, if not the best players in terms of all the different games that he played. No Limit Hold'em, one of the best players. Pot Limit Omaha, one of the best players. Eventually, he played mixed games. He was kind of spewy at first, I think, but he became one of the best players. He was good in heads up. He was good in ring. He's been a part of just many infamous hands online. He's just been in that upper echelon to the point where people wouldn't play him, and he had to play the best people in different games. I mean, like when I played Sauce, he was playing tons of other games as well before that, whereas I was just specializing in one game type. So, I mean, the guy doesn't play much tournaments, definitely, and he's not in the limelight. He's not played a lot of the shows. He's not like, he's more of a private person. But in terms of poker, mind for poker and understanding theory of poker, the way the game is supposed to be played, how the game actually works and functions, it would not surprise me if Ben Solsky is the #1 all-time best player for understanding poker theory.
Yeah, good stuff. Makes sense. All right, moving on to You're in Danger, the second Dang brother on this list, D Dang. He's the #5 winner ever on High Stakes Database. You know, a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier with his brother Hack Dang is kind of going to overlap here. They played at the same time against a lot of the same players. What do you got to say about D?
I think I could be wrong here, but I think he played less years after sort of the top era. I think Hack played a little bit more poker afterwards. I think he was the barcode screen name on PokerStars. He played a bunch of PLO after that. So I think of those two, I think that Hack would have to get the nod over Z. Is it pronounced? I pronounce Z, I assume, right? Z. I don't know. My white person is showing here for sure.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Regardless, he did have slightly better results on Full Tilt, but I just think if you look at the entirety of their work, I think Hack is just slightly gets the nod over Z.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, just 4 names left on the list, and they're all big ones. First, we got Dan Smith, King Dan, 38 million in live earnings, #6 in live MTTs, has also had a lot of success in the cash game arena. I think he was like a kind of like 5K NL heads up reg, like maybe 2011 region, 2010, and has obviously played a lot of high stakes cash live as well. He's been on a lot of those shows and such. But sort of the main stuff, or the main most impressive part of his achievements have been in live tournaments. He's done really, really well in those. Obviously, you're pretty close friends with Dan. What do you got to say?
Well, I don't know if me and Dan are pretty close friends, but you know, I definitely chat with Dan every now and then, and he is a all-time tournament great. He really appreciates the subtleties of tournament poker, and he is quite sharp at any form of poker that he plays or sets his mind to. He is a phenomenal poker player, and it's not surprising that he is #6 all-time in live tournaments. He's been playing them for just years and years and years. Still at the absolute top of the game. And I would say his cash game, I don't think that's really been his focus over the last number of years. He definitely will play some cash games for sure, but I view Dan Smith as an absolute top-notch player today and has been for many years. For
sure. All right, moving on to Berri Greenstein, 3 WSOP bracelets. I think pretty much everyone watching this knows quite a bit about Berri already. I mean, pretty much a legend. I remember reading his Ace on the River book back in the day, and it was just a great read. Really kind of propelled me into poker, to be honest. What's your thoughts on Greenstein?
I think Greenstein was one of those people that I put on the list, and then I started to look up stuff about them, and I felt like maybe it's just there's certain names you just want to have on the list.
Right.
And he's won 3 bracelets, and he has done a lot to get people into poker. He's played in a lot of the high stakes cash games. Who will ever forget Durr running it once versus him on high stakes poker and just banging it off versus the aces, right? Was it ace queen versus aces, something like that? I think
it was king queen suited on a queen high board, and Dwan had a flush draw with that hand, and then Berri just had the naked aces. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, definitely a legend of the game, but I feel like he's not top 20, Mike. Maybe that's too direct, but I just don't see enough stuff outside of, you know, he's played a lot of cash games in California. Definitely one of the greatest figures of the game. Like if this list was just for figures of the game, and like for example, Jason Somerville was named so many times. It's like, guys, like if it was who's done the most for poker, Jason Somerville's obviously on the list. But if it's just straight up who's the best 20 players ever, I just can't put Somerville on that list.
Yeah, when you were gathering this list, I mean, we were talking about it, you initially gathering it, and I think there was an effort made on your part to try to get people from different domains. Like you tried to get a decent amount of old school live guys, you tried to get a decent amount of online current players, tried to get some really old school guys like the Amarillo Slim type people. We just tried to pepper in at least some from each arena. Because again, people are going to define best differently. And if you want to vote for Berri for whatever reason, that's why we're having this be a public vote thing. But yeah, and I agree with you. I wouldn't put Berri in the top 20. Moving on to Isaac Haxton, number 24 winner on high stakes database, 28 million in earnings, number 17 live MTTs. So Ike is another one of those guys that was in the mix in like, the mid 2000s, 2006, 2010 arena and was one of the region and was one of the top players. And then he did have that staying power into and through the solver era. And he's still, playing at quite a high level when he does play. I think he doesn't quite play as much as he used to. You want to add anything about Ike?
Yeah, I think Ike has played a lot of different games. He's played No Limit Cash. He's played No Limit Tournaments. He's played PLO. So he's certainly played a wide array of game types, both online and live. I think in the online era, he was viewed as one of the top players. He had great results. He's on the list for HSDB number 24 all time on Full Tilt. So he's definitely been an online crusher in both heads up and ring formats, and also managed to successfully transition from No Limit to PLO, which is not the easiest transition to make. Also in tournaments, certainly a large number of earnings. I will say, I feel like in live tournaments, Ike was always kind of spewy, and some of the top tournament guys viewed him as a bit of a punter. I certainly played some hands against Ike, which were pretty punty on Ike's part, but still obviously a winning good player in those games. So I think Ike has been a very good player across a variety of games over his career and is certainly a strong candidate for the top 20.
For sure. All right. Last one on the list. And again, guys, this was RNG'd and somehow this ended up being the last person on the list. Phil Ivey, the number 1 winner all time on high stakes database. 32 million in live earnings. That's good for number 11 all time, plus his 10 WSOP bracelets tied for number 2. And he has been in the mix in the WSOP events for quite a bit less time than other guys who have that many, like Phil Hellmuth and oh god, I'm blanking on the other name with 10. But the point is, he's only been playing WSOP tournaments for about 20-ish years, and he's already at 10. Just super impressive stuff. Obviously, everyone knows Phil Ivey. What do you got to say about him, Doug?
The thing is, there's just no way you can put him in the top 20, Mike. He's just not done enough. The reality is, he has never played enough of triple draw. And if you think about his online career, okay, sure, he won the most money, but what about all the times that he lost?
Yeah, how much did he
definitely lose? And he was definitely way worse in Heads Up No Limit. He never played me. He was clearly scared of that. I think at this point, there's really nothing to say other than the fact that he also had a bunch of crossbooks and mixed games. Those went badly for him. He lost a lot of money playing in those games. And then what about the 1 year he went to Australia? He didn't win the 250K. I just think that there's a long list of reasons here to not put Ivy in the top 20. And really, I hope that people understand those things before they vote. Well, a great comment in the chat. He also lost his court cases.
Yeah, that's got to be factored in, no doubt. All right, so that's it for the list. Now, here's how it's going to work. You can go right now to upswingpoker.com/vote. You're going to see the list of players that we just went through. That list is randomized. Every time you refresh it, it's going to be a different order. You're going to run through the list. I'm actually going to share my screen for a second so you guys can see what you're going to be doing. Now, my apologies to the people listening on audio platforms, but, can only do our best here. So you're going to see a list that looks like this, right? You're going to scroll down. You're going to see the players listed here. What you have to do is vote between 1 and 5, most deserving to least deserving. So if you think Timothy Adams deserves it a lot to be in the top 20, you're going to put him at a 5. If you think he's the least deserving, you'd put him at a 1. And then you just continue down this list until you vote for all of them. Once you get to the very bottom, you're going to hit submit right here. Then for your write-ins, if you think we snub someone, you write them in right here and then submit there. You can submit 3 different ones. If you only have 1, you can submit 1. Just don't do duplicates. They won't be counted if you do a duplicate. So that's how the voting works. We're going to reveal the results of that next week, next Tuesday. March 1st. It's going to be very similar structure pod where we sort of go through the results of this vote that you guys are going to work on. We're going to blast this out on social media as well, so we'll get even more people voting. And then what's the plan for the one on March 8th, Doug? Sort of the last one where we have the top 20.
Well, here's what I want us to do, Mike. I want me and you to both make our top 20 lists, okay? And we'll keep them to ourselves until after the March 8th one, and then we'll have our own list of what we thought, because we don't want to be biased by what they vote for, and we want to be able to compare to what the fans voted at the end. But the plan is this: so going into the March 8th one, we'll close voting in 4 or 5 days, and maybe even less, something like that. And then we will take those top 20, and we'll be back probably with a panel. I'll definitely be here. Maybe we'll have Mike. Maybe we'll have some other people, depending on who wants to join. I want to make sure not to have any of the people in the top 20 on the panel. And there's some people I was mulling over, maybe inviting to come join the pod. So let's see how that goes. And then we'll do a more in-depth case for each. And then we're going to rank them. So right now it's just to get into the top 20. You're voting. Are they more or less deserving to get into the top 20? And then 1 week from the day, we're going to have our deep case for each. And then we'll do one last vote here, and then we'll have our final answer on the players. Maybe we'll release it via a YouTube video or something. I don't know. We'll think about the releasing, but yeah, that's the game plan. Thank you all for tuning in today. By the way, very long podcast, had a lot of names to get through, but I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, I'm sure we missed a lot of facts about a lot of people. There were so many names to get through, and we're again just 2 people. But if you feel strongly, put their name in the list. Make sure you vote according to what you think makes sense, and feel free to encourage other people to vote as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thanks for having me on, Doug. Thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week on March 1st.
Sounds good. See you guys.